The winter dawn broke cold over the Montana mountains, painting the snow-capped peaks in shades of amber and rose. Colonel Robert Mitchell sat at his kitchen table, hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had gone cold an hour ago. The cabin was silent except for the occasional creak of settling wood and the whisper of wind through the pines outside. On the worn table before him lay the pieces of a Remington 700 sniper rifle, each component arranged with the same precision he had learned 50 years ago. His hands shook slightly as he picked up the bolt assembly. Arthritis. The doctors called it degenerative joint disease, a fancy term for getting old. Robert called it what it was, time catching up with a man who had spent too many nights in the cold, too many hours in impossible positions, too many years carrying weight that had nothing to do with equipment. The rifle had been his companion for 4 decades. He knew every scratch, every worn spot, every microscopic imperfection in the metal. The stock bore the ghosts of 1,000 missions, though most of those missions existed only in classified files that would never see daylight. This morning, like every morning for the past 2 years since his retirement, Robert cleaned the weapon with the same ritual care. It was meditation. It was penance. It was the only thing that kept his hand steady. On the wall behind him hung the evidence of a life lived in shadows. A black and white photograph showed a young Marine in dress blues, fresh-faced and eager, standing at attention outside the recruit depot at Paris Island. That was 1980. The kid in that photo had no idea what was coming. No idea that 40 years later he would be sitting alone in a cabin, talking to ghosts. Next to that photo hung another, this one in color but fading with age. A wedding day. Robert in his uniform, a beautiful woman in white beside him, both of them young and smiling like they believed happiness was something permanent. Sarah. Her name still hurt to think, even after all these years. She had been gone 5 years now. Cancer. He had learned about it from a mutual friend, 3 months after the funeral. She had not wanted him there. She had made that clear in the letter she sent back unopened, the one where he had tried to explain, tried to apologize, tried to make 28 years of absence somehow acceptable. There was a third photograph on the wall, but Robert had turned it face down years ago. He knew what it showed. A baby girl, 6 months old, with Sarah's eyes and his stubborn chin. Katherine. Kate. The daughter he had walked away from when she was 6 years old. The daughter who had grown up without him, who had become someone extraordinary despite his absence, who hated him with a purity that he completely understood and absolutely deserved. Robert set down the bolt and reached for the bottle of bourbon beside his coffee cup. It was 10 in the morning. That should have bothered him more than it did. He poured 2 fingers into the cold coffee and took a long drink. The burn was familiar and welcome. It was the only warmth in the cabin that felt honest. The radio on the counter played old country music, the kind that told stories about mistakes and regrets and roads not taken. Garth Brooks was singing about the dance, about not knowing if he would have changed anything if he had known how it would end. Robert knew his answer. He would have changed everything. He would have been a father instead of a ghost. But time did not work that way. Time moved in one direction, and all you could do was live with the choices you made. He picked up a cleaning rod and began running patches through the barrel. The motion was automatic, muscle memory so deep it required no thought. That was good. Thinking was dangerous. Thinking led to remembering, and remembering led to the bottle. And the bottle led nowhere except deeper into the same hole he had been digging for 3 decades. The mountain outside his window was beautiful in the morning light, pristine and indifferent. Robert had chosen this place specifically for its isolation. The nearest town was 40 miles away. The nearest neighbor was 15. He could go weeks without seeing another human being, and often did. That was how he wanted it. People asked questions. People expected things. People reminded him that he was still alive when most days he felt like something that should have died a long time ago. His mind drifted, the way it always did when his hands were busy and his guard was down. He was 8 years old again, standing in a field in rural Wyoming, holding a rifle that felt too big for his small frame. His father stood beside him, patient and solid, smelling of gun oil and Old Spice aftershave. The autumn sun was warm on young Robert's face, but his hands were cold with nervousness. The memory was so clear it hurt. His father's hand on his shoulder. The weight of it. The steadiness. They had been tracking a mule deer for 2 hours, moving slowly through the sagebrush and rabbit grass. His father had let him carry the rifle the whole way, teaching him how to move with it, how to be aware of the barrel, how to treat it with respect even when it was not loaded. Now they sat on a small ridge overlooking a valley. The deer was there, 700 yards away, grazing near a creek. Impossible shot for an 8-year-old. Impossible shot for most adults. But his father was teaching him something more important than marksmanship. He was teaching him what it meant to be ready, what it meant to choose. "Son, a rifle is a responsibility," his father said, voice deep and careful. "You take a life, you carry it forever. You understand?" "Yes, sir," young Robert said, trying to sound confident. "I'll remember." His father had been sick even then, though young Robert did not know it yet. The cancer was already there, working quietly, stealing time they should have had together. Maybe his father knew. Maybe that was why he was so insistent on these lessons, on passing down what he knew before it was too late. His father knelt down, looked him in the eye with the kind of intensity that made the moment feel sacred. "Good, because I won't be here to remind you." Young Robert had felt a chill despite the warm sun. "What do you mean?" His father smiled, but it was sad. "I mean, someday you'll be a man and I'll just be a memory. When that day comes, I need you to remember this. The rifle isn't power, it's responsibility. Every time you put your finger on a trigger, you're making a choice that you'll live with forever." He placed the rifle across young Robert's lap, his weathered hands steady and sure. "Your grandfather taught me this. He learned it in the war. Now I'm teaching you. Someday, if you're lucky, you'll have a son or daughter to teach. That's how we live on. Not in glory, not in the kills, in the wisdom we pass down." At 8 years old, Robert had not fully understood what his father meant. He thought it was just something adults said, the way they talked about futures that seemed impossible and distant. But 6 months later, his father was dead. Heart attack while working the ranch, gone before the ambulance arrived, and Robert was left with that last conversation. Those last words, that last warning etched into his memory like words carved in stone. He never got to take that shot at the deer. His father had smiled and said, "Not today. Today, you're learning to choose. Tomorrow, you'll learn to shoot. That's the right order." But there was no tomorrow. Not with his father, and Robert had spent the next 54 years wondering if he had learned the lessons in the right order or if he had gotten it all backwards. You carry it forever. Robert had carried a lot since then. 47 confirmed kills across 3 wars and a dozen classified operations. Each one necessary. Each one justified. Each one a weight that never got lighter. He had become exactly what his father warned him about. A man who carried death. A man who lived with ghosts. A man who had sacrificed everything human in himself to be the perfect weapon. The cleaning rod moved through the barrel with practiced rhythm. In and out, clearing away the residue of the last range session, preparing the weapon for the next time it would be needed. Except there would not be a next time. Robert was 62 years old. His hands shook. His eyes needed reading glasses. His hearing was shot from years of muzzle blast. He was obsolete technology, a relic from wars that younger men barely remembered. The phone rang. The sound was so unexpected in the morning silence that Robert actually flinched. His hand knocked against the coffee mug, sloshing cold bourbon and coffee across the table. He stared at the phone like it was a piece of unexploded ordnance. Nobody called him. Nobody had this number except the Veterans Affairs Office, and they only called once a month to check if he was still alive. It rang again, insistent. Robert wiped his hands on a rag and picked up the phone. "Mitchell. Colonel Patterson, this is Master Chief Samuel Harrison, Naval Special Warfare Center." The voice hit Robert like a punch to the chest. But Doc. He had not heard that voice in 2 years, not since his retirement ceremony, where they had shaken hands awkwardly and promised to stay in touch in the way men do when they both know the promises are hollow. "I'm retired, Doc," Robert said, his own voice rougher than he expected. "You know that." "I know." There was a pause on the other end of the line, the kind of pause that said what came next was not going to be easy. "But your daughter needs you." The world tilted. Robert sat down hard in the chair, the phone pressed to his ear. "Kate, what happened?" "Nothing yet." Doc's voice was careful, measured. "But something will if you don't help." Robert's throat was tight. "She made it clear 28 years ago she didn't need me." "She never said that," Doc replied quietly. "She was 6 years old. She didn't say anything. You're the one who left." The words were not accusatory, just factual, which somehow made them worse. Robert closed his eyes. What do you want from me, Doc? I need you to come to Coronado, today if possible, tomorrow at the latest. Why? Doc took a breath. Kate has been assigned an impossible mission. 3,000-meter shot, maybe more. High-value target, time-sensitive, civilian lives on the line. Her team's survival depends on success. Robert felt something old and cold settle in his chest. 3,000 meters. That was beyond extreme. That was the edge of what was humanly possible, even with perfect conditions and the best equipment. She's one of the best snipers in the Navy, he said. Why does she need me? Because you're the only person alive who has made a shot like this under combat conditions. Doc's voice dropped. Beirut, 1983, the ghost. Robert's hand tightened on the phone. That call sign, that mission, that shot that had defined and destroyed everything that came after. That was 40 years ago. I know, but you're still the only one who knows what it takes. Not just the technical skills, the mental preparation, the weight of it. Doc paused. Robert, I wouldn't ask if there was another option, but there isn't. And I don't want to lose another good operator because we were too proud to ask for help. Robert stood and walked to the window, looking out at the mountains. His reflection stared back at him, ghostly in the glass. An old man with gray in his beard and lines around his eyes. A stranger wearing his face. Does she know you're calling me? No. Doc was quiet for a moment. She'll refuse to work with you, I know that. But she needs this, not just the tactical knowledge. She needs to make peace with something. And so do you. I don't deserve peace. No, Doc agreed, you don't. But maybe you can earn it. One last time. Robert looked at the rifle parts on his table, at the photos on his wall, at the empty bourbon bottle and the cold coffee and the life he had built from isolation and regret. He thought about his father's words, you carry it forever. Maybe it was time to carry it somewhere useful. I'll be there tomorrow morning. Thank you, Robert. Don't thank me yet. She's going to hate this. She already hates you, Doc said, not unkindly. At least this way, you'll both be in the same room. The line went dead. Robert stood holding the phone for a long moment, then carefully set it down. He looked at the rifle parts, at the photos, at the life he was about to leave behind, if only for a little while. Then he began packing. The flight from Missoula to San Diego took 6 hours with a layover in Denver. Robert spent most of it staring out the window at clouds and trying not to think about what came next. The airplane was full of families and business people, normal people living normal lives. Robert felt like an alien among them. He had not been around this many people in months. The noise was overwhelming. The casual conversations, the laughter, the complaints about delayed flights and bad coffee. It all felt surreal. He caught his reflection in the bathroom mirror during the layover. The fluorescent lights were unkind. He looked every one of his 62 years. The gray in his beard had spread since he last bothered to look. His eyes were tired. His face was weathered from too many years in harsh climates. He looked like what he was, an old soldier who had stayed too long at the war. When he finally landed in San Diego, the California sun felt like an insult after Montana's winter cold. Robert rented a car and drove to Coronado, taking the long way around the bay so he could delay the inevitable. The naval amphibious base was exactly as he remembered it. Palm trees and sunshine and young warriors who moved with the confidence of people who had not yet learned their own mortality. He showed his retired military ID at the gate. The young Marine on duty barely glanced at it. Purpose of visit, sir? Meeting with Master Chief Harrison at the Special Warfare Center. The Marine handed back his ID and waved him through without ceremony. No recognition, no acknowledgement of the medals Robert had earned or the years he had served. He was just another old veteran, probably looking for a tour or trying to relive glory days. Robert wondered if the kid even noticed the slight tremor in his hands as he took the ID back. The Special Warfare Center was busy with afternoon training. Robert could hear the crack of rifle fire from the ranges, the cadence calls from PT formations running past. It smelled like gun oil and sweat and salt water. It smelled like purpose. Robert had forgotten what purpose smelled like. He found Doc in an office that overlooked the ranges. The Master Chief looked up from a stack of paperwork and smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. You came. I said I would. Robert closed the door behind him. Where is she? Range 4. She's been there since 0500. Doc stood and walked to the window. She does that, goes early, stays late, works herself until she can barely stand. trying to be perfect. She learned that from someone. Robert's voice was flat. Yeah, she did. Doc turned to look at him. You look like hell, Robert. I feel like it. Robert moved to stand beside his old friend. Through the window, he could see the distant ranges. What have you told her? That I invited a consultant, someone with extreme long-range experience. Doc glanced at him. I didn't mention your name. Figured it would be better coming from you. Better or just less likely to make her refuse before we get started? Both. Doc's expression was serious. This mission is no joke, Robert. The target is a domestic extremist planning an attack on a military family event at Fort Irwin. 400 people, including children. The shot is 3,200 meters through mountainous terrain. One opportunity. If she misses, a lot of people die. Robert felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders, the familiar pressure of lives depending on a single bullet. What's the timeline? 3 weeks to train, then wheels up. Doc handed him a folder. Full brief is in here, target profile, location analysis, weather projections. But the bottom line is simple. Nobody on this base has the experience for this shot except you. And you can't take it because your hands shake and your eyes are shot. Robert opened the folder and scanned the contents. Maps, satellite imagery, a photograph of the target. He forced himself to focus on the tactical problem instead of the emotional one. She's good enough. I've seen her scores. Scores aren't combat, you know that. Doc's voice was gentle. She needs to learn what you know. Not just the math, the mindset, the weight of it. Robert closed the folder. The weight is what broke me, Doc. I know, but maybe teaching her how to carry it will fix something in you. Doc met his eyes, or maybe it won't. But either way, those 400 people deserve the best chance they can get. And that means you and Kate working together. She'll hate every second. Probably. Doc almost smiled. But she'll learn. She's stubborn like you. Robert looked out the window toward Range 4. Somewhere out there was his daughter. The little girl he had abandoned. The woman she had become without him. The warrior who carried his blood and his skills and none of his mistakes because she had learned to be better than him. Where do I find her? Doc pointed. Range 4, weapons maintenance area. She'll be cleaning her rifle. She always cleans it after shooting. Just like you taught yourself. The words hit harder than they should have. Just like you taught yourself. Because he had never been there to teach her. She had learned alone through observation and determination, picking up the pieces of his legacy without his guidance. Robert walked across the base toward Range 4, moving slowly to give himself time to prepare. But there was no preparation for this. No tactical brief that would make facing your daughter after 28 years any easier. The afternoon sun beat down on his shoulders. The sound of gunfire echoed across the ranges. Young operators ran past in formation, chanting cadence calls about warriors and battles and glory. They looked so young, they looked like he had once looked, before the weight settled in. Range 4 was quieter than the others. This was where the precision shooters worked, where noise and chaos gave way to patience and calculation. Robert walked past the firing line toward the weapons maintenance area, a covered pavilion with workbenches and cleaning supplies. And there she was. Katherine Mitchell sat cross-legged on the concrete, a Beirut M82A1 completely disassembled before her. The components were laid out with obsessive precision on a clean tarp. Every spring, every bolt, every pin in perfect order. Her hands moved with the same surgical care Robert remembered using himself. She picked up each piece, examined it, cleaned it thoroughly, and set it aside with the reverence of someone handling sacred objects. Robert stopped 20 feet away and just watched. She wore standard fatigues, her dark hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. Even sitting, she carried herself with a stillness that spoke of years of training. She was beautiful in the way that warriors are beautiful, all lean muscle and focused intensity. She had Sarah's eyes and his jawline. She had both of them in her face, a reminder of what could have been if he had made different choices. She did not look up, did not acknowledge his presence, even though she had to know he was there. Snipers always knew. Snipers felt eyes on them the way normal people felt rain. She just kept working, her movements deliberate and unhurried. The rifle was clearly not just her weapon, it was her meditation, her ritual, the thing she could control when everything else was chaos. Robert understood that. He understood it so completely it hurt. He moved closer, his boots loud on the concrete. She still did not look up. He stopped at the edge of the tarp, looking down at the disassembled weapon. It was maintained better than his own rifle. Every part gleamed, every surface showed the kind of care that came from genuine respect for the craft. "That's good technique," Robert said quietly. "Clean bore, no solvent residue. Bolt face is perfect." Catherine's hand stopped moving. She set down the barrel extension she had been inspecting and slowly looked up. When their eyes met, Robert felt the impact of her gaze like a physical blow. Sarah's eyes, but cold, so cold. "Who the hell are you?" Her voice was controlled, professional, but with an edge underneath like broken glass. "Colonel Robert Mitchell, I'm here to help with your mission." She stood in one fluid motion, rising to her full height. She was tall for a woman, 5'9" or 10. She stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then recognition flickered across her face. He watched it happen, watched her see his features, watched her understand. "No," the word was flat and final. "Absolutely not." "Captain Mitchell," Robert began, but she cut him off. "It's Captain to you, not Kate, not Catherine, certainly not daughter." Her voice was ice. "I don't know what Doc told you, but you need to leave. Now." Robert held his ground. "The mission needs someone with extreme long-range experience. I have that experience." "I don't need you." Catherine turned back to her rifle, dismissing him. "I've been doing this job for 10 years without you. I'll keep doing it without you." This shot is different. 3,200 meters through variable terrain and weather. One opportunity, 400 lives on the line. Robert kept his voice level. "You're good, maybe the best on this base. But this is beyond good. This requires experience you don't have." Catherine's shoulders tensed. She did not turn around. "And you have this experience?" "Beirut, 1983, 2,100 meters. Storm conditions. Made the shot." Robert paused. "They called me the Ghost. Maybe you heard the story." She turned slowly and he saw something flicker in her eyes. Not warmth, not forgiveness, but recognition. "That was you, the Beirut Ghost." Stupid call sign. Robert managed something that was almost a smile. "But yeah, that was me." Catherine stared at him for a long moment. He could see the war happening behind her eyes. The professional part of her that wanted the mission to succeed, battling against the wounded child who wanted him gone. Her hands had stopped working on the rifle. They rested on her knees, fingers curled tight like she was trying to hold something in. "I was 12 when I first heard that story," she said quietly. "One of the instructors at recruit training, he was telling war stories trying to motivate us. Talked about the Ghost of Beirut, the Marine sniper who made an impossible shot in a storm and saved 100 lives. He said it was legendary, the kind of shot that gets taught in sniper school for generations." She looked down at her hands, at the calluses and scars that marked them. "I remember thinking, I wonder if my dad knew him. I used to do that when I was young. Make up stories about what you were doing, where you were. I'd tell myself you were on some secret mission, that you couldn't come home because you were saving the world. That someday you'd come back and explain everything and it would all make sense." Her voice was steady, but Robert could hear the fracture lines underneath, the old wounds that had never properly healed. "Then I got older. I stopped making up stories. I just got angry, and I learned to shoot. I learned to be so good that nobody would ever question whether I belonged. So good that nobody would say I was weak or emotional or couldn't handle the pressure." She looked up at him again, and Robert saw his own eyes staring back at him with a lifetime of hurt. "I became a sniper because of you. Not because you inspired me. Because I wanted to prove I didn't need you. That I could be better than the ghost who abandoned us. That I could make the shots and save the lives and carry the weight all by myself." The words cut deeper than any knife. Robert stood there, taking it, knowing he deserved every syllable. "You succeeded. You are better than me." "Don't." Catherine's voice was sharp as a blade. "Don't try to make this about pride or accomplishment. You don't get to be proud of me. You weren't there for any of it. Not for the training, not for the first deployment, not when I made my first kill and spent 3 days throwing up because I couldn't handle what I'd done. Not when Mom got sick. Not when she died and I had to plan her funeral alone because her husband disappeared 23 years earlier and nobody knew where to find him." She stood, rising to her full height, and Robert saw his own fury and pain reflected back at him from a face that looked so much like his own, it was almost like looking in a mirror. "You never told me, in 6 years of my childhood. Not once did you mention you were one of the best snipers in Marine Corps history. I never told you a lot of things." "No, you didn't." Her voice was sharp enough to draw blood. You just left. Walked away one morning when I was 6 years old and never came back. Not for birthdays, not for graduations, not for Mom's funeral. She paused, and her next words were quieter, but somehow cut deeper. I used to leave the porch light on, every single night for 3 years. Mom tried to make me turn it off, but I wouldn't. I thought maybe you'd come back if there was a light to guide you home, like you were just lost and needed to find your way back to us. The last words hit like hammer blows. Robert forced himself not to look away. I know, and I'm sorry. Sorry, she laughed, but there was no humor in it. 28 years, and you show up with sorry like it means something. Robert swallowed hard. It doesn't. I know it doesn't. But those 400 people at Fort Irwin didn't do anything wrong. They shouldn't die because you and I can't be in the same room. Catherine's jaw clenched. For a moment, he thought she might hit him. Instead, she turned back to her rifle and continued cleaning, her movements sharp and angry. Doc set this up. He did. He thought you needed help. He thought I needed to help. Robert moved closer to the workbench. He was right on both counts. I don't need anything from you. The mission does. She slammed a cleaning rod down on the bench hard enough to make the parts jump. Don't you dare use mission and duty and honor to manipulate me. You walked away from all of that when you abandoned your family. You're right. Robert's voice was quiet. I did. I chose the Corps over you and your mother. I chose career over family. I chose to be a coward, and I've lived with that choice every single day since. Katherine turned to face him again. Her eyes were bright with tears she refused to let fall. Then why are you here? Guilt? One last attempt at redemption before you die? The words were meant to wound, and they did. But Robert had earned every bit of her anger. He met her gaze steadily. Both. I have stage 4 lung cancer, 6 months, maybe less. And before I die, I need to do one thing right. I need to make sure you have every advantage for this mission. Because you matter. Because the mission matters. Because I failed you in every way a father can fail. And this is the only thing I have left to give. The confession hung in the air between them. Katherine stared at him, her expression cycling through shock, anger, pain, and something else he could not quite identify. Finally, she looked away. You're dying. Yes. And you want to spend your last months teaching me? Yes. She was quiet for a long time, her hands resting on the half-assembled rifle. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. Why now? Why not 10 years ago? Why not 20? Because I was a coward then. Robert's throat was tight. I'm still a coward now, but I'm a coward who is running out of time to make things right. Katherine picked up the rifle's bolt assembly and turned it over in her hands, examining it with the same focus she would give a target at 3,000 meters. Robert watched her process, watched her think. He could see his own mannerisms in her movements, the way she used physical tasks to work through emotional problems. She was his daughter in ways that went beyond genetics. Finally, she looked up. If I agree to this, we work together as professionals, not as father and daughter. You're a consultant. I'm the primary operator. We train, we execute the mission. Then you leave and we never speak again. The terms were harsh but fair. Robert nodded. Agreed. I don't forgive you. I won't forgive you. You don't get absolution because you're dying. I know. And if you fail me, if you let me down one more time, I will never speak to you again, even if you live to be 100. Understood. Katherine set down the bolt and extended her hand. It was a gesture of professional courtesy, nothing more. Robert shook it, feeling the calluses on her palm, the strength in her grip. Warrior's hands, hands that knew how to hold a rifle, how to take a life, how to carry weight. Training starts tomorrow at 0500, she said. Don't be late. I won't be. She pulled her hand back and returned to her rifle. You can go now. I need to finish maintenance. Robert nodded and turned to leave. He made it 5 steps before her voice stopped him. Colonel. He turned back. Yes. Katherine did not look at him. Her hands moved over the rifle with practiced precision. The Beirut shot. The ghost. How many people died because of it? The question hit him like incoming fire. Robert stood silent for a moment, weighing whether to tell her the truth. Then he realized he owed her at least that much. 8 Marines, my spotter, my friend. His name was David Morrison. He had a wife and 2 sons. Katherine's hands stilled. She looked up slowly. You killed your own men? The shot was successful. The target was eliminated. But the building was rigged. It came down, killed 8 men who were there to provide security. Robert's voice was flat, factual. I spent 40 years thinking it was my fault. Turns out it was planned that way, but that doesn't bring them back. Catherine stared at him with something that might have been understanding, or might have been horror. And you want me to learn from you? I want you to learn what I learned, that every shot has consequences, that success and failure aren't always the same thing, that the weight of the rifle is nothing compared to the weight of what comes after. Robert met her eyes. I want you to be better than I was, to make the shot, to save the people, to live with it afterward. That's what I can teach you. Catherine was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded once slowly and turned back to her rifle. Robert walked away across the empty range. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Behind him, he could hear the methodical sounds of Catherine reassembling her weapon, each part clicking into place with precision, each component coming together into a complete whole. He thought about his father's words, about carrying weight, about responsibility, about how teaching was the last duty of old warriors. Maybe this was his third shot, not the one in Beirut, not the hundreds of others across 3 wars, but this one, teaching his daughter, passing on hard-earned wisdom, making sure she did not make his mistakes. Maybe this was how he earned the right to die. That evening, Robert sat alone in a hotel room in Coronado, looking through the mission briefing Doc had given him. The target profile was disturbing. Marcus Webb, former Army Ranger turned extreme, planning to attack a family event at Fort Irwin. Intelligence suggested he had acquired military-grade explosives and was coordinating with a network of anti-government militia members. The attack was scheduled for 3 weeks from now. 400 military families attending a community picnic. Children, spouses, veterans, all gathered in one place for a celebration of service. Webb's compound was in the mountains east of Barstow, California. Remote location, fortified, on position, limited access. The shot would be from a ridge across a valley, 3,247 meters. The number was oddly specific, and Robert realized with a start that it was almost exactly the distance of his grandfather's favorite shooting range multiplied by 4. Symbolic. Impossible. The kind of shot that defined careers or destroyed them. He studied the terrain maps, the elevation changes, the wind patterns, the seasonal weather. This shot would require everything he had learned in 40 years, and Catherine would have to execute it with hands that did not shake and eyes that did not need reading glasses. She would have to be perfect, and he would have to teach her how. Robert pulled out a battered leather notebook from his bag. The cover was worn smooth from decades of handling. Inside were pages filled with neat handwriting, notes, calculations, observations, lessons learned in blood and sleepless nights. He had started this notebook when Catherine was born, intending to pass it on to her someday. 36 years of collected wisdom about the craft of precision shooting, 36 years of knowledge she had never received because he had not been there to give it. He opened to the first page. The ink had faded, but the words were still legible. For Catherine, when she's ready. Love, Dad. The date underneath was from 28 years ago, the month after he walked away. Robert closed the notebook and set it on the nightstand. Tomorrow morning at 0500, training would begin. Tomorrow he would start trying to compress 40 years of experience into 3 weeks of preparation. Tomorrow he would attempt to teach his daughter how to make an impossible shot and live with the consequences. Tomorrow he would try to be a father. He lay back on the hotel bed and stared at the ceiling. Sleep would not come easily. It never did. But for the first time in years, the insomnia was not just about ghosts and guilt. It was about purpose, about having something useful to do with the time he had left, about maybe, possibly, earning the right to carry the weight a little less heavily. Outside, the Pacific Ocean whispered against the shore. Inside, Robert Mitchell closed his eyes and waited for dawn. The morning came cold and gray, fog rolling in from the Pacific to blanket the base in thick white silence. Robert stood at the edge of Range 4 at 0445, 15 minutes early, because old habits died hard and Marines were never late. The air tasted of salt and gun oil. Somewhere in the distance, waves crashed against the beach. Closer, he could hear the first stirrings of the base coming alive. Boots on pavement, engines turning over. The world preparing for another day of war preparation. Catherine arrived at 0455, also early, also unable to shake the training that had been beaten into her bones. She wore standard fatigues and carried a range bag that looked like it weighed 40 pounds. Her face was carefully neutral, a mask that revealed nothing. Professional distance. That was the agreement. Consultant and operator. Nothing more. Morning, Robert said. Katherine nodded but did not speak. She walked past him to the firing line and began setting up her equipment with the same methodical precision he had watched yesterday. Beirut M82A1, spotting scope, ballistic computer, weather station, notebook, each item placed with exact care. Robert recognized the ritual, the centering, the preparation of mind and body for the work ahead. He let her work in silence, watching the way she moved, the way she checked each piece of equipment twice. She was good, better than good. Her movement spoke of thousands of hours of practice, of muscle memory so deep it was almost instinctive. But there was tension in her shoulders, tightness in her jaw. She was working too hard, trying too much, carrying weight she did not need to carry. When she finally looked up at him, her eyes were hard. What's first? Robert set down his own bag. Before we shoot, we talk. Katherine's expression flickered with annoyance. I didn't come here to talk. I came here to train. I know, but shooting is the easy part. Any operator with decent fundamentals can hit targets at standard ranges. What separates good snipers from great ones isn't the marksmanship. It's what's up here. Robert tapped his temple. And here, he placed his hand over his heart. That's what I'm here to teach. Katherine crossed her arms. Philosophy doesn't kill targets. No, Robert agreed, but it keeps you from becoming the bullet. It keeps you human after you pull the trigger. It's the difference between an operator who makes the shot and goes home and one who makes the shot and spends the next 40 years wishing they were dead. The words hung in the cold morning air. Katherine stared at him, and Robert could see her processing, weighing whether to trust him or dismiss him. Finally, she uncrossed her arms. Fine, talk. Robert walked to the edge of the range and looked out across the empty distance. Fog obscured the far targets, turning the world into shades of gray and white. Every sniper takes 3 shots in their career. Not 3 bullets, 3 moments that define who they are. Katherine moved to stand beside him, maintaining distance but listening. Go on. The first shot is the one that kills your innocence, Robert said quietly. The moment you realize that taking a life isn't theoretical anymore. It's real. It's final. It changes you in ways you can't undo. Some people never recover from their first shot. They leave the service or transfer to roles where they don't have to face that responsibility again. He glanced at her. What was your first shot? Katherine was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. Afghanistan, Helmand Province. I was 24, just finished sniper training. My spotter and I were providing overwatch for a patrol when we identified a Taliban commander setting up an IED, 1,400 meters. Clean conditions, perfect shot. She stared out at the fog. I remember thinking it would feel different, more significant, but it was just squeeze the trigger, watch the recoil, see the target drop. Clinical, mechanical, like all the training exercises. And after, Robert asked? After, we confirmed the kill and moved to the next position. Katherine's jaw tightened. That night, I threw up until there was nothing left. Couldn't sleep for 3 days. Kept seeing his face through the scope. Kept wondering if he had family. If someone somewhere was waiting for him to come home. Robert nodded slowly. That's your innocence dying. It had to. You can't be a warrior and keep your innocence. But that doesn't mean it doesn't cost you something. Katherine turned to look at him. What was your first shot? The question hit harder than Robert expected. He had not talked about this in decades. Had buried it under layers of other missions, other kills, other memories he did not want to examine. But if he was going to ask her to be honest, he needed to give honesty in return. Grenada, 1983. Same year as Beirut, but earlier, October. I was 29 years old, already a staff sergeant with 8 years in the Corps. Robert's voice roughened with the memory. Operation Urgent Fury. We were part of the invasion force sent to rescue American medical students and restore order after the communist coup. He could still see it, the tropical heat, the chaos of urban combat, the weight of the rifle against his shoulder. My spotter and I were providing security for a Marine company pushing into St. George's. We got intelligence about a People's Revolutionary Army officer coordinating ambushes from a church bell tower. 800 meters through urban clutter. Not an impossible shot, but complicated by the environment. Robert closed his eyes, seeing it all again with perfect clarity. The officer was young, maybe mid-20s. Through the scope, I could see he was frightened. Not a hardened revolutionary, just a local kid who'd been swept up in something bigger than he understood. He kept looking at a photograph, putting it in his pocket, taking it out again, like it was a talisman. Catherine's expression shifted slightly. You hesitated. For about 3 seconds, long enough for my spotter to ask if I was good, long enough for me to think about the photograph, about who was in it. Robert opened his eyes. Then I took the shot because that's what Marines do. We complete the mission. The officer dropped and our company advanced without casualties. He looked at his hands. That night I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about that photograph, about who would never get it back, about the family that would never know what happened to him. My platoon sergeant found me throwing up behind the barracks. He said it was normal, said the first one was always hard, said it would get easier. Did it? Katherine asked quietly. The shooting got easier. The living with it never did. Robert met her eyes. That was my innocence dying. The moment I understood that every trigger pull was a choice with consequences that rippled outward forever. That understanding made me a better sniper because I never took a shot lightly. But it also made me a worse human because I could never forget the weight. Katherine was silent, absorbing his words. Finally, she spoke. You said 3 shots. What's the second? The second shot is the one that haunts you, Robert said. The shot where everything goes wrong. Where you do everything right, but the universe doesn't care. Where you learn that skill and preparation aren't always enough. He paused. That's Beirut. Katherine turned to face him fully. Tell me. Robert had known this moment was coming. Had known he would have to open the wound and let her see the infection inside. He looked at the fog, at the world reduced to gray and white, and began to speak. November 1983. 1 month after Grenada, I was 29 years old, scout sniper with 1st Battalion 8th Marines. We were part of the peacekeeping force in Beirut. The situation was worse than the news reported. Militias fighting each other, terrorists targeting Western forces, civilians caught in the crossfire. Every day felt like we were one mistake away from disaster. He sat down on the concrete, his back against the firing line barrier. Katherine hesitated, then sat beside him, maintaining space but present. Robert continued. Intelligence identified a terrorist cell planning an attack on the Marine barracks. The leader was a man named Hassan Nazari, mid-30s, former military officer, absolutely ruthless. He'd been responsible for at least a dozen attacks on coalition forces. Finding him was nearly impossible. He moved constantly, never stayed in one place, always surrounded by civilians for cover. The memories came faster now, clearer. Robert could smell the diesel fuel and dust of Beirut, could feel the heat pressing down like a physical weight. My spotter was Corporal David Morrison. Best friend I ever had. We'd gone through sniper school together, deployed to Grenada together, saved each other's lives more times than I could count. He had a wife back home, 2 sons, 8 and 6 years old. He showed me their pictures every single day. Katherine listened without interrupting, and Robert was grateful. If he stopped now, he might not start again. We got intelligence that Nazari was meeting with other cell leaders in an abandoned building overlooking the harbor. 4th floor, south-facing window, brief exposure window. The problem was distance, 2,100 meters from our position to his. That was extreme range for the era. We didn't have the technology you have now, no ballistic computers, no laser rangefinders, just math and instinct and hope. Robert closed his eyes, seeing it all again with perfect clarity. Morrison and I spent 6 hours getting into position, climbing through rubble, avoiding patrols, setting up on a rooftop that gave us clear line of sight. The building was partially collapsed, unstable, but it was the only position that worked. We waited. 3 more hours. Morrison talked about his family, about how after this deployment, he was putting in papers to become an instructor. He wanted to be home for his son's baseball games, wanted to teach them to fish, wanted to be the dad his own father never was. The words caught in Robert's throat. He forced himself to continue. I told him I should do the same, that I had a baby girl back home, that I was missing her growing up. Morrison said we'd both put in papers together, make a pact, be the fathers our kids deserved. Katherine was very still beside him. Robert opened his eyes but did not look at her. At 1300 hours, Nazari appeared in the window, exactly where intelligence said he would be. Morrison gave me the read: wind speed, temperature, barometric pressure, angle compensation. I made the calculations, adjusted the scope, settled into my breathing. Robert could feel it now. The weight of the rifle, the texture of the trigger, the moment of absolute stillness before the shot. Morrison asked if I was ready. I said yes. He said, take your time. We've got all day. I said, I want to get home to my daughter. He said, me too, brother. Me too. I squeezed the trigger. The memory played out in slow motion. Bullet flight time was 3.8 seconds. We watched through our scopes. Perfect conditions, perfect shot. Nazari dropped. Clean kill. Morrison started to celebrate. We did it. Mission success. Time to go home. Robert's hands were shaking now. He pressed them flat against the concrete. Then the building exploded. Katherine drew in a sharp breath. IED? No. Robert's voice was hollow. The building was rigged for demolition. Someone had wired it with explosives weeks in advance, waiting for the right moment. My shot didn't just kill Nazari. It triggered the detonation through a pressure sensor or remote trigger we never identified. The entire structure came down. There were 8 Marines on the lower floors providing security. Our quick reaction force, all of them died instantly. He forced himself to look at Katherine. Morrison and I were on our roof. We watched it happen, watched the building collapse into rubble and dust. Morrison tried to get down there, tried to help dig through the debris. I grabbed him, told him it was too late. Everyone was dead. He fought me, said we had to try, said those were our brothers down there. I held him back because I knew if we went into that collapse zone, we'd die too, and it wouldn't save anyone. Robert's voice cracked. Then our building started to collapse. The explosion had destabilized the entire block. Concrete cracking, rebar snapping. Morrison fell as the roof gave way. I grabbed for him. Our hands touched for just a second. He looked at me, said, "Tell my boys I love them." Then he was gone, fell 4 stories into the rubble. I found his body 3 hours later when the recovery teams finally made it through. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the distant sounds of the bass seemed to fade away. Katherine sat frozen, staring at Robert with an expression he could not read. The official report said it was a tragic accident, Robert continued, his voice mechanical now, empty of emotion because emotion would break him. That the building was booby-trapped and there was no way to know. Command gave me a medal for eliminating a high-value target, told me I saved hundreds of lives because Nazari's network collapsed after his death. Morrison got a posthumous Navy Cross. His widow got a folded flag and 2 fatherless sons and a lifetime of wondering why. He looked down at his shaking hands. I went to the funeral, stood in the back where nobody would see me, watched those 2 boys cry over their father's casket. The oldest was 8, same age I was when my father died. I saw my future in his eyes, saw what it meant to grow up without a dad, saw the hole that never fills no matter how much time passes. And I knew, Robert's voice was barely a whisper now, I absolutely knew that I couldn't do that to Katherine. Couldn't risk making her that boy. Couldn't face the possibility that she might lose me the way Morrison's sons lost him. So I left, told myself it was noble, told myself I was protecting her from potential grief. But really I was just protecting myself from having to be brave. So you left, Katherine said quietly, to protect me from losing you. So I left, Robert agreed, to protect myself from facing you if I died. I was a coward. I convinced myself I was being noble, sacrificing my family for duty. But the truth was I couldn't handle the responsibility, couldn't handle being a husband and father while knowing that every mission might be my last. Morrison was a better man than me. He was trying to get home to his family. I used mine as an excuse to run. Katherine's eyes were wet, but no tears fell. Did you ever find out who rigged the building? Eventually. Robert's voice hardened with old rage. Took me 20 years and a lot of digging through classified files. Turns out Nazari wasn't the real target. He was meeting with someone from our chain of command, someone who was selling weapons to multiple factions, playing both sides, making millions while our troops died in the crossfire. Who? Katherine's voice was sharp. Senator Harold Vance. He was a colonel then, running covert operations out of Beirut. Untouchable, connected, ruthless. Robert's jaw clenched. The building demolition was supposed to destroy evidence of the weapons deals and eliminate witnesses who knew too much. My shot was supposed to kill Nazari before he could expose the conspiracy. The explosion was supposed to look like enemy action. 8 Marines died to cover Vance's crimes. And he let you think it was your fault, Katherine said slowly. Let Morrison's widow think her husband died in legitimate combat. Let those sons grow up believing their father's death meant something when really he died for corporate profit and political corruption. Yes, Robert's voice was flat. That's the second shot, the one that haunts you, not because you failed, because you succeeded, because you did everything right and evil people use that success for evil ends, because skill and honor aren't always enough when the system itself is corrupt. Katherine stood abruptly, pacing away from him. She stood with her back to Robert, shoulders tight with anger. When she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. You carried that guilt for 40 years, thought you killed your best friend, thought you orphaned his sons, thought you were responsible for destroying a family, all because some corrupt officer decided profit was more important than honor or lives or truth. Yes, Robert pushed himself to his feet, joints protesting. That's the second shot, Kate, the one that haunts you, the one that makes you question everything. The one that teaches you that sometimes doing your job perfectly still leads to tragedy because the people giving you orders are betraying everything you're supposed to stand for. Katherine turned back to him, and Robert saw his own pain reflected in her face. Why are you telling me this now? Because you need to know what you're carrying. Robert moved closer, his voice urgent. That 3,000-meter shot you're training for? If you make it, you'll be a hero. Commendations, promotions, respect. But the real question isn't whether you can make the shot. It's whether the target is who they say it is, whether the mission is what they tell you it is, whether you're being used or being trusted. Katherine's eyes widened slightly. You think this mission might be compromised? I think Vance is still a senator with his hands in military operations. I think he's still untouchable and ruthless and willing to use good people for bad ends. I think if he wanted to eliminate someone, he'd use the best sniper he could find and manufacture a mission that made the killing look justified. Robert held her gaze. I think you need to verify everything, question everything, trust nothing except your own eyes and your own conscience. That's why you came, Katherine said slowly, understanding dawning. Not just to teach me the shot, to protect me from being used the way you were used. Yes. Robert stepped back. The third shot is the one that defines you. It's not about the target. It's about who you choose to be when the moment comes. When you have to decide between orders and conscience, between duty and morality, between being a weapon and being human. Katherine stood silent for a long moment, processing everything he had told her. Finally, she nodded once, slowly. Show me how to make the shot. Then we'll figure out if it's the right shot to take. They trained through the morning, working at the fundamentals with the kind of patience that separated good operators from exceptional ones. Robert watched Katherine shoot at 1,200 meters, 1,500, 1,800. She was technically perfect. Breathing control was textbook. Trigger squeeze showed no anticipation or flinch. Follow-through was clean and precise. Everything spoke of thousands of hours of practice, of discipline beaten into muscle memory. But there was something missing. Some element of connection between shooter and rifle that made the difference between good and exceptional. You're thinking too much, Robert said after her 10th shot at 1,800 meters. The group was tight, but not exceptional. 4 shots center mass, one just outside the kill zone. Trying to control every variable. The rifle isn't your enemy, it's your partner. Katherine frowned, frustration flickering across her face. I'm making the shots. You're making 90% of them. At 3,000 meters, 90% isn't enough. Robert moved to stand beside her at the firing line. At that distance, a 2-mile-per-hour wind shift can push your bullet 3 feet off target. A 1-degree temperature change affects trajectory. The rotation of the Earth matters. You can't control all of it. You have to learn to work with it, to feel it instead of calculating it. I don't understand. Katherine's voice carried an edge. Are you telling me to ignore the math, the ballistics? No, I'm telling you to learn the math so well it becomes instinct, so you don't have to think about it consciously. Robert gestured at the distant target. Right now, you're running calculations in your head, adjusting the scope, second-guessing your read. All of that creates hesitation. Tiny delays between when you should shoot and when you do shoot. At 1,800 meters, you can get away with it. At 3,000, that hesitation will kill the shot. He could see her processing this, the analytical part of her mind working through the concept. So how do I stop thinking? You don't stop thinking. You start feeling. Robert picked up the Barrett, feeling the familiar weight settle into his hands. His hands were shaking worse today. The cold morning air and the stress of talking about Beirut had made the arthritis flare. The tremor was visible, embarrassing, but he could still demonstrate the concept even if he could no longer execute it flawlessly. Watch my breathing. Robert settled into position behind the rifle, his body remembering the position even after 2 years away from operational shooting. Most shooters try to hold their breath at the moment of the shot, stop all movement, create perfect stillness. That works at normal ranges where you're fighting physiological tremor, but at extreme ranges, you need to do the opposite. You need to breathe with the rifle, let it move with your body, find the rhythm where everything aligns naturally instead of forcing it. He demonstrated breathing slowly and deliberately. The rifle rose and fell microscopically with each inhalation and exhalation. His hands shook with arthritis, but underneath that was the old steadiness, the foundation of 40 years of practice. You're not fighting the movement, you're dancing with it, waiting for the moment when breath and heartbeat and earth and wind all come together, not forcing it, allowing it, inviting it. Katherine watched intently, and Robert could see her cataloging every detail. She was a good student when she let herself be. Observant, quick to adapt. She had his discipline and her mother's grace. If she could just learn to trust herself instead of trying to be perfect, she would be unstoppable. Robert continued breathing, waiting, feeling for the moment. The target swam in his scope. His eyes watered from the strain. His hands shook. The old injury in his shoulder from a fall in Iraq sent pain down his arm. But for just an instant, everything aligned. Breath, heartbeat, wind, earth. He squeezed the trigger with the pad of his finger, smooth and progressive, no jerk or anticipation. The Barrett roared. Recoil slammed into his shoulder, aggravating the old injury. Through the scope, he watched the bullet trace and knew immediately it was off. The shot went wide by more than 2 feet. Complete miss. Robert set down the rifle and smiled ruefully, trying to hide the pain in his shoulder. That's what happens when you're old and broken and your body won't cooperate anymore. But you saw the principle. The allowing instead of forcing. The invitation instead of demand. That's what you need to learn. Katherine picked up the rifle with a gentleness that surprised him. She settled into position and worked the bolt to chamber a fresh round. This time, her breathing was different, softer, more natural, less like a technical exercise and more like meditation. She waited longer between breaths. Let the rifle settle. Robert could see her feeling for the moment instead of calculating it. When she fired, the bullet struck 8 inches from center. Better than before, but not centered. Better, Robert said quietly. Again, don't think about the last shot. Each shot is new, fresh, its own moment. Katherine worked the bolt, chambered, breathed, waited, fired. 6 inches from center. Better, again. Bolt, chamber, breathe, wait, fire. 4 inches. Good. You're feeling it now, again. They fell into a rhythm. Katherine shooting, Robert coaching with minimal words. Bolt, breathe, wait, fire. Each shot incrementally better as she learned to trust the process instead of forcing the result. By the 20th shot, she was consistently hitting within 2 inches of center mass at 1,800 meters. That was exceptional shooting under any circumstances. Now go to 2,000, Robert said. Same principles. Don't overthink the distance. It's just more time for the bullet to fly. More time for you to trust the shot. Katherine adjusted her position, ran new calculations on her ballistic computer, and made scope corrections. 2,000 meters, over a mile. The target looked impossibly small, even through 20 power magnification. She settled in and began the same breathing pattern, waiting for the moment, inviting it instead of demanding it. The first shot at 2,000 went low and right, missed by 3 feet. Don't chase it, Robert said. That shot is gone. This shot is new. Katherine made a minor adjustment and fired again. 18 inches low. Better, again. 12 inches low. Getting there, trust it. 6 inches low. Almost, one more. Katherine breathed. Waited. The morning sun had burned off the last of the fog and the temperature was rising. That would affect her calculations. But she didn't reach for the computer. Didn't second guess. Just felt for the adjustment and made it instinctively. She fired. Center mass. Robert felt something warm spread through his chest. Perfect. Do it again. She did. Center mass. Again. Center mass. Again. Center mass. 5 shots in a row at 2,000 meters. All center mass. That was world-class shooting. That was the skill level needed for the mission. Katherine set down the rifle and looked at him with something that might have been wonder. I felt it. That moment where everything aligned. It was like the rifle wanted to shoot. Like I was just the vehicle. That's exactly it, Robert said. The rifle is the instrument. You're the artist. But the music only happens when you stop trying to control every note and start feeling the melody. Katherine smiled. It was small and brief, but genuine. The first smile she had given him in 28 years. That was almost poetic. I didn't know Marines did poetry. We don't. Robert returned the smile. But we do metaphors when the coffee's good. They sat in the shade of the range building, drinking water and eating protein bars that tasted like cardboard, but provided necessary fuel. The morning fog had burned off completely now, leaving the day hot and bright and harsh. Other operators were training on distant ranges, the crack of gunfire echoing across the base in irregular rhythm. Normal sounds of war preparation. The soundtrack of a military installation going about its deadly business. Katherine was quiet, working through something internal. Robert could see the conflict in the tension of her shoulders, the way she gripped the water bottle too tightly, the way her eyes kept unfocusing on some middle distance that had nothing to do with range estimation. He let her have the space, let her process whatever she needed to process. Pushing would only make her retreat. That much he remembered about her from when she was young. She had always needed time to work through her emotions before she could voice them. The silence stretched. 5 minutes. 10. Robert finished his protein bar and started on a second one. His appetite had been poor since the cancer diagnosis, but he forced himself to eat. He needed the energy for the work they were doing, needed to stay strong enough to teach for as long as she needed him. Finally, Katherine set down her water bottle with deliberate care and looked at him directly. Her eyes were careful, guarded. But underneath the professional mask, Robert could see something vulnerable and terrified. I need to tell you something. Robert waited, holding very still. Whatever this was, it was important. Possibly the most important thing she would say to him in the limited time they had together. Katherine took a breath, released it, took another. I'm pregnant, 12 weeks. The words hit like incoming fire. Robert felt his breath catch, felt the world tilt slightly. Of all the things he had expected her to say, this was not on the list. He sat frozen for a moment, processing. Katherine pregnant, his daughter, carrying a child, making him a grandfather. The thought was so foreign he almost could not grasp it. Does the father know? He asked when he could speak. There is no father. Katherine's voice was flat, emotionless in the way that meant she was holding back a flood. One night, conference in Virginia Beach. Too much wine after a bad day. A mistake with someone whose name I barely remember. He's not in the picture. Doesn't even know it happened. She looked away, jaw clenched. And before you ask, I haven't told anyone. If the Navy finds out I'm off the teams, career over. Everything I've built for 12 years gone in an instant. They'll say I'm a liability, that I can't perform my duties, that I should have been more careful. They'll transfer me to some desk job where I process paperwork and die a slow death watching other people do what I was born to do. Robert heard the fear underneath the anger, the terror of losing everything that defined her. He knew that fear, had felt it himself when Katherine was born. The moment when your identity collides with a new responsibility and you have to choose which one gets to survive. What are you going to do? He asked quietly. I don't know. Katherine's voice cracked slightly. Part of me wants to get the mission done first, then figure it out. Finish this, prove I can still perform, then deal with the consequences. Part of me thinks I should tell command now and take myself off the roster. Be responsible, be safe, protect the child over the career. She turned back to face him, and Robert saw tears gathering in her eyes that she refused to let fall. And part of me wants to just disappear, take my savings, go somewhere remote, start over where nobody knows me, Raise this baby alone and never look back at any of it. The Navy, the shooting, the missions. Just walk away and be someone else. Robert understood every part of that. The desire to run, to reinvent yourself, to escape the weight of who you had been. What do you want? Catherine's laugh was bitter and broken. I don't know what I want. I never planned for this. My entire adult life has been about the job, about being the best, about proving I belonged in a world that didn't want me. Every day I had to be better than the men around me just to be seen as equal. Every mission I had to be flawless just to avoid confirming their suspicions that women couldn't hack it. She gestured at her flat stomach with something close to despair. And now I have to choose between the career I bled for and a future I never imagined. If I keep the baby, I lose the teams. If I lose the teams, I lose my identity. I don't know who I am without the rifle, without the missions, without the purpose. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I'm terrified, completely terrified. And I can't show it because showing fear means I'm weak, and being weak means I never should have been here in the first place. Robert felt something crack open in his chest, the pain of recognition, the agony of seeing his own mistakes reflected in his daughter's crisis. He had been exactly where she was, had faced exactly this choice, and he had chosen so badly that it had poisoned the next 40 years of his life. I was 29 when you were born, he said slowly, correcting himself from the story he almost told. Already 8 years in the Corps with a clear path to career advancement. Terrified doesn't begin to cover what I felt. I had just come back from Grenada. My first real combat deployment. My first kill, still fresh in my mind. And suddenly I was responsible for this tiny human who depended on me completely. He looked at his hands, at the tremors that marked them. I didn't know how to be a father and a Marine. Didn't know how to balance a family with a career that required me to leave for months at a time, to put myself in danger, to potentially never come home. I thought I had to choose, thought one would destroy the other. So I chose wrong. And now you're dying, Katherine said quietly, alone with nothing but regrets and medals that nobody cares about. Yes, Robert's voice was rough. That's exactly right. I chose the Marines over you and your mother. I told myself it was duty, it was honor, it was important. I convinced myself I was serving something bigger than myself. But the truth is I was just scared. Scared of failing as a father, scared of not being good enough, scared of loving something more than I loved the simplicity and clarity of following orders. He finally looked up at her, met those eyes that were so much like his own. Don't make my mistake. Don't let fear choose for you. Don't convince yourself that you have to sacrifice one thing to keep another. You can be a mother and still be a warrior. You can love that child and still have purpose, but you have to choose it deliberately, consciously, not run from it because it's hard. Katherine wiped at her eyes angrily. Easy to say from 40 years of hindsight, harder to do when you're in the middle of it and everyone's watching and waiting for you to fail. You're right, it is harder. Robert leaned forward. But you're not 29 and stupid like I was. You're 36 and you've already proven everything you needed to prove. You've made the shots. You've earned the respect. You've shown that women belong on the teams. You don't have anything left to prove to anyone except yourself. He paused, weighing his next words carefully. The mission is in 2 weeks. 400 people will die if you fail. That's real. That's important. But there's another life that's just as important. The one growing inside you. And the question isn't whether you can do both. The question is whether you're brave enough to treat. Katherine stared at him, tears running freely now. You don't understand. I can't be weak. I can't be emotional. I can't show vulnerability, or they'll say I'm not fit for duty. I have to be perfect all the time, or I confirm every stereotype about why women shouldn't be in combat. You think weakness is feeling? Robert shook his head. The weakest thing I ever did was refuse to feel, refuse to love, refuse to be human because I thought being a warrior meant being a weapon. I spent 40 years as a weapon and it made me empty, hollow, dead inside long before the cancer started killing me. He reached out and this time he did touch her, just his hand on her shoulder, light, tentative. The first physical contact they had had in 28 years. The strongest thing you can do is choose life, choose love, Choose to be more than just an operator with on a rifle. That's courage. Real courage. Not the kind they give medals for. The kind that matters. Catherine covered his hand with her own. Her calluses matched his. Warrior's hands on warrior's hands. I'm scared. Good. Robert's voice was gentle. Fear means you understand what you're risking. Fear means you still have something to lose. Fear means you're still human. He squeezed her shoulder. Don't lose that. Don't let them make you into a weapon. Be a warrior. Be human. Be a mother. Be all of it or be nothing. They sat together in silence for a long time. Hands joined, understanding passing between them that needed no words. Finally, Catherine spoke. I'm going to finish the mission. Then I'm going to tell command. Then I'm going to figure out how to be a mother. She looked at him. And I need you to teach me everything you know, not just about shooting, about carrying the weight, about living after the shot, about being more than the rifle. Robert nodded. That's the third shot, the one that defines you, not the kill, the choice to live. They returned to the range and continued training, but something had shifted. Catherine moved differently now, less rigidly, more fluidly. She was thinking about more than just the mission, thinking about the future, about legacy, about what she wanted to leave behind. At 1,500 meters, she hit center mass 5 times in a row. At 1,800, she hit 4 of 5. At 2,000, she breathed with the rifle and let the moment come to her instead of forcing it. The bullet struck center mass. Robert smiled. Again. Catherine repeated the shot. Center mass. Again. Center mass. Again. Center mass. By sunset, she was hitting center mass at 2,000 meters with 98% accuracy. Better than Robert had ever been at her age. Better than most snipers ever achieved. She was ready for the next step. Tomorrow we go to 2,500, Robert said. The day after 3,000. You're getting there. Catherine nodded, exhausted but satisfied. She began breaking down her equipment with the same care she had used to assemble it. Robert watched her work, seeing his own discipline reflected in her movements, but also something he had never had. Grace, fluidity, the ability to be hard and soft at the same time, warrior and human together. Thank you, Catherine said quietly without looking up. For what? For telling me about Grenada, about Beirut, about Morrison, about your mistakes. She glanced at him. For being honest even when it hurt. Robert felt something warm and unfamiliar in his chest. Pride maybe, or hope. That's what fathers are supposed to do, even when they're 40 years too late. Catherine almost smiled, almost. Tomorrow, 0500. I'll be here. She walked away across the empty range, and Robert stood watching until she disappeared into the gathering dark. The weight in his chest was still there, the guilt and regret and pain of 40 years. But there was something else now, too, something that felt almost like purpose. He looked down at his hands. They were still shaking, still marked by age and damage and too many years holding death. But today they had helped instead of hurt. Today they had taught instead of killed. Today they had been a father's hands. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was how you earned redemption, not through grand gestures or perfect apologies, but through small moments of honesty and teaching and showing up. Through being present even when you did not deserve to be. Robert picked up his own gear and walked back toward his hotel. The California night was warm and clear, stars visible despite the light pollution from the city. He thought about Morrison, about Grenada and Beirut, and all the missions across 3 wars where he had followed orders without question, and how sometimes that led to tragedy and sometimes to triumph, and he never knew which until it was too late. He thought about Catherine, about the child she was carrying, about the future that was coming whether they were ready or not, about legacy and what it meant to pass something good forward instead of just passing on pain. Tomorrow they would train again, and the day after, and the day after that, and maybe, if they were very lucky and very good, they would make the impossible shot and save 400 lives, and Catherine would get to be a mother, and Robert would get to die, knowing he had finally done one thing right. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was grace. The hotel room was dark when Robert returned. He did not turn on the lights, just sat by the window looking out at the base below. Lights glowing in the distance. Young warriors preparing for wars that would shape them in ways they could not yet understand. He had been one of them once, eager and certain, and absolutely convinced that he knew what mattered. Now he knew better. Now he knew that what mattered was not the shots you made, not the medals you earned, not the legends people told about you. What mattered was the lives you touched, the wisdom you passed on, the love you gave even when you were terrified of it. Robert pulled out Morrison's photo. He had carried it for 40 years, a reminder of what he had lost, of what his choices had cost. But maybe it was time to let that go. Maybe it was time to remember Morrison differently, not as the friend he had failed to save, but as the man who had tried to be a good father right up until the end. He set the photo on the nightstand where he could see it. Tomorrow he would call Morrison's widow. Tell her the truth about what had really happened. Tell her that her husband had died a hero protecting others, not just a victim of random violence. Tell her that David Morrison had been the best man Robert ever knew. That was part of redemption too, setting the record straight, honoring the dead by telling their truth. Robert lay down on the bed fully clothed and closed his eyes. Sleep came easier than it had in years. And for the first time in decades, he did not dream of Beirut. He dreamed of Katherine, of teaching her to shoot when she was 8 years old, the way his father had taught him. The dream that never happened, but maybe, in some small way, was happening now. The past could not be changed, but the future was still unwritten, and Robert Mitchell was going to spend every day he had left writing a better ending than the one he deserved. Day 10 of training arrived with the kind of clear, cold morning that made every sound sharp and every detail visible. Katherine was hitting 3,000-meter targets with 80% accuracy now, her groups tightening with each session. The transformation Robert had witnessed over the past week was remarkable. She had moved from technically proficient to genuinely exceptional, from calculating shots to feeling them. She was ready, or as ready as anyone could be for an impossible task. But Robert's mind was elsewhere. Something about the mission briefing had been gnawing at him for days, a splinter of doubt that refused to be ignored. The target profile was too clean, too perfect. Marcus Webb, former Army Ranger turned domestic extremist, planning a mass casualty attack on military families at Fort Irwin. It read like a Hollywood script, every detail designed to justify extreme action. And in Robert's experience, when intelligence was too perfect, it was usually too good to be true. He had seen this pattern before, in Beirut, in Somalia, in Iraq. Operations that seemed straightforward until you pulled the thread and discovered the whole tapestry was rotten. Vance's signature was all over those operations. The same man who had orchestrated the Beirut building demolition was now a senator with oversight of military operations. A man with the power to manipulate intelligence, to frame targets, to use skilled operators as unwitting assassins. Robert needed answers, and he knew where to start looking. At 0600, while Katherine was running her morning physical training, Robert drove into San Diego. The address he had was for a small apartment in a neighborhood that had seen better days. Peeling paint on stucco walls, chain-link fences around small yards, cars that were older than the rust holding them together. This was where retired intelligence officers came to die quietly, forgotten by the agencies they had served. Martin Holbrook opened the door on the third knock. He was 68 years old, bent with arthritis, eyes clouded with cataracts. But his mind was still sharp, and his memory was encyclopedic. He had been CIA for 30 years before the agency forced him into retirement for asking too many uncomfortable questions. Mitchell, Holbrook's voice was like gravel being crushed. I wondered when you'd come asking questions. You knew I would? I've been watching the briefings, monitoring communications. Old habits. Holbrook stepped aside to let Robert enter. The apartment was small and crowded with filing cabinets and computer equipment, a paranoid man's fortress. Your daughter's mission, Fort Irwin, Marcus Webb. It stinks worse than a 3-day corpse in August. Robert felt his suspicions crystallize into certainty. Tell me. Holbrook poured coffee that was thick as motor oil and handed Robert a cup. They sat at a cluttered table covered in documents and photographs. Webb is real. Former Ranger, dishonorable discharge for refusing orders in Afghanistan, went off-grid 5 years ago, surfaced as part of an anti-government militia. FBI's been tracking him for 18 months. But, Robert prompted, but the attack plan is fiction. Holbrook pulled out a folder thick with surveillance photos. Webb's compound in the Barstow Mountains. It's not a terrorist cell headquarters. It's an FBI safe house. Webb is a confidential informant who turned state's evidence against his militia contacts 6 months ago. He's been in protective custody ever since. Robert felt cold spread through his chest. So the target Katherine is supposed to eliminate is a federal witness under FBI protection. Holbrook tapped another photo. This one showed a different man, middle-aged and professional-looking. The real target is Special Agent Thomas Brennan, FBI counterintelligence. He's been investigating corruption in military procurement, following money trails from defense contracts to offshore accounts, getting very close to some very powerful people. Robert did not need to ask who. Vance, among others. Brennan has evidence of a network: senators, generals, contractors, billions in fraudulent billings, weapons sales to prohibited countries, falsified readiness reports. The kind of scandal that would bring down a dozen careers and possibly trigger a constitutional crisis. Holbrook's expression was grim. Vance needs Brennan dead, but he can't just have him assassinated, too obvious. So he creates a false flag operation, frames Webb as a terrorist threat, gets the military to eliminate him. Brennan dies in the crossfire, and it looks like collateral damage during a legitimate counterterrorism operation. Robert's hands clenched around the coffee cup. He's using Katherine the same way he used me in Beirut. Exactly. She makes the shot thinking she's saving lives. Webb and Brennan die. Vance's corruption stays buried. And if anyone asks questions later, there's a decorated SEAL sniper who followed lawful orders based on intelligence provided by trusted sources. Holbrook leaned back. Perfect deniability. Perfect weapon. Your daughter becomes Vance's assassin without ever knowing it. The rage that filled Robert was cold and pure. 40 years ago, Vance had used him to kill and cover crimes. Now he was trying to do the same thing to Katherine, using her skill, her honor, her desire to protect innocent lives as tools for murder and corruption. It was obscene. It was unforgivable. It could not be allowed to happen. What's Brennan's timeline? Robert asked. He's scheduled to testify before a grand jury in 3 weeks. Whatever Vance is planning needs to happen before then. Holbrook pulled out a map marked with locations and dates. The Fort Irwin family event is real. 400 people will be there, but there's no actual threat. Vance will create one. False intelligence, planted evidence, maybe even hire mercenaries to stage an attack. The military responds. Katherine takes the shot. Chaos ensues. Brennan dies and everyone thinks it was a tragic mistake during a crisis. Robert studied the map, his tactical mind already working through scenarios. How do I stop it? You don't. Holbrook's voice was flat. You're a retired colonel with no authority, no resources, and stage 4 cancer. You go to official channels, Vance buries you. You go public, they discredit you as a conspiracy theorist. You try to warn your daughter, she has to choose between believing you and trusting her chain of command. He paused. The system is designed to protect itself. You can't beat it from outside. Then I beat it from inside. Robert stood, his mind made up. I complete the mission. Katherine's way. The right way. Holbrook raised an eyebrow. You're talking about going rogue, conducting an unauthorized operation. That's treason, Mitchell. They'll court-martial your daughter. Prison time. Dishonorable discharge. Everything she's worked for, gone. Better than being Vance's assassin. Robert headed for the door. Better than carrying that weight for 40 years. What are you going to do? Robert looked back. Teach her the third shot, the one that defines you, the choice between orders and conscience. Holbrook smiled grimly. You always were the stubborn type. Good luck, Colonel. You're going to need it. The drive back to Coronado took 2 hours through morning traffic. Robert used the time to think, to plan, to prepare for what came next. He was asking Katherine to throw away her career, to risk everything on the word of a dying father she had every reason not to trust. He was asking her to choose between the institution that had given her purpose and the conscience that made her human. It was the hardest thing he had ever asked of anyone, and he had no right to ask it. But he was going to anyway, because the alternative was worse. Katherine was at the range when Robert returned, working through drills with a focus that was almost meditative. She did not look up when he approached, just continued her breathing exercises, her trigger control practice, her endless repetitions of the fundamentals. Professional, disciplined, everything a sniper should be. We need to talk, Robert said quietly. Katherine finished her current magazine, cleared the weapon, and set it down before looking at him. What's wrong? Robert gestured away from the range toward a maintenance building where they could speak privately. Katherine followed, curiosity and concern warring on her face. Inside the building, surrounded by the smell of gun oil and metal, Robert told her everything. Holbrook's intelligence, Vance's pattern, the truth about Marcus Webb and Special Agent Brennan, the real purpose of the mission. Katherine listened without interrupting, her expression growing harder with each revelation. When Robert finished, she was silent for a long moment. Finally, she spoke. "This sounds insane. You're telling me the entire mission is fabricated. That command is lying to us that a United States senator is orchestrating a false flag assassination using military assets." Her voice was carefully controlled. "Do you have proof?" "Holbrook has documentation, photos, financial records, intercepted communications." Robert met her eyes. "But nothing that would hold up in court. Nothing that command would accept as justification to abort the mission. Vance is too careful, too connected. Any official challenge gets buried." Katherine paced the small space, her mind working through the implications. "So we're supposed to what? Refuse orders? Go rogue? Conduct an unauthorized operation based on intelligence from a retired spook that no one will corroborate?" "Yes." Robert did not flinch from it. "I'm asking you to trust me, to trust that I'm not making the same mistake twice, to believe that this time I'm trying to save you from what destroyed me." Katherine stopped pacing and turned to face him fully. Her expression was conflicted, torn between training that said trust the chain of command and instinct that said something was wrong. If you're right and we do nothing, an innocent federal agent dies and Vance's corruption continues. If you're wrong and we go rogue, I lose everything and we both go to prison. Yes. And if I refuse, if I say this is too crazy, too risky, that I'm not throwing away my career on your paranoia." Robert's voice was gentle. "Then I respect that decision. You complete the mission as ordered. I'll try to warn Brennan through back channels and hope he survives. And we both live with whatever happens." Katherine's jaw clenched. "That's not fair. You can't put this on me." "Life isn't fair. I learned that in Beirut when 8 good men died for someone else's greed." Robert stepped closer. "I'm not asking you to do this for me. I'm asking you to do it for yourself. For the woman you want to be. For the mother you're going to become. For the child who will someday ask what you stood for." Katherine's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You're asking me to sacrifice everything I've worked for, everything I am." "No." Robert shook his head. "I'm asking you to sacrifice what you do for who you are. The job isn't your identity. Your character is. Your choices are. The job is just a vehicle. When that vehicle is being used to commit murder, you have to choose whether to keep driving or get out and walk." The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of impossible choices. Katherine looked at her hands, at the calluses that marked her as a warrior, at the ring finger that bore no wedding band, at the future growing inside her that would demand she be more than just a shooter. "If we do this," she said finally, "we need a plan. Not just refusing orders, a real operation. Extract the targets, document the truth, expose Vance, do it right or don't do it at all." Relief flooded through Robert. "Agreed, we'll need help. Doc can provide operational support. We'll need intelligence on the real threat if there is one. We'll need an extraction plan for Webb and Brennan. And we'll need to do all of it while maintaining cover so Vance doesn't know we're on to him." Katherine looked up, and Robert saw his own determination reflected in her face. "How long do we have?" "Mission is scheduled for 72 hours from now. We deploy in 48. That gives us 2 days to plan and prep." Robert pulled out a map. "Vance will have people watching. Maybe in command, maybe on your team. We have to assume someone is reporting back." "Lieutenant Walsh?" Katherine's voice was certain. "She's the liaison from intelligence. Joined the team 6 weeks ago. Always asking questions, always taking notes. I thought she was just thorough. But if Vance has a plan, it's her." Robert nodded. "Then we keep Walsh in the dark as long as possible. Feed her the story she expects while we plan the real operation." He spread the map on a workbench. "The official mission has you setting up Overwatch here, 3,200 meters from the compound. What if we adjust that? Get closer, change the angle, give ourselves options." Katherine studied the map with professional focus. "If we move to this ridge instead, we're only 2,800 meters out. Still extreme range, but more manageable. And we'd have line of sight to multiple approach routes. More tactical flexibility." "Good. We'll propose it as a technical adjustment. Better position, cleaner shot. Command won't question it because it makes operational sense." Robert traced routes on the map. For extraction, we'll need vehicles pre-staged here and here, a backup team to secure Webb and Brennan once we confirm they're not threats, and communications that bypass official channels. Doc can arrange that. Catherine was warming to the tactical problem now, her training taking over from her emotions. He has contacts in the FBI, retired agents who owe him favors. We could coordinate with them, get confirmation on Brennan's status, maybe even get bureau support for the extraction. Robert felt pride swell in his chest. She was thinking like a mission commander now, not just following orders, but actively planning for success. We'll also need contingency plans. If Vance realizes we're onto him, he might try to neutralize us. We need escape routes, safe houses, people we can trust. They spent the next 4 hours planning in meticulous detail, every variable considered, every contingency mapped, every risk assessed. It was the kind of operational planning that Robert had done 1,000 times in his career, but this time felt different. This time he was planning with his daughter, teaching her not just how to shoot, but how to think, how to lead, how to make impossible choices and live with the consequences. At 1400 hours, Doc arrived at the range. Robert had called him earlier, explained the situation in broad terms. Now they briefed him fully on what Holbrook had discovered and what they were planning. Doc listened without interrupting, his weathered face revealing nothing until they finished. "You're both insane," Doc said finally. "You know that, right? Completely, certifiably insane." "Probably," Robert agreed. "But are you in?" Doc looked at Catherine, then at Robert, then back at Catherine. "When I took my oath, I swore to support and defend the Constitution. Not careers, not institutions. The Constitution. If what you're saying is true, Vance is using military assets to commit murder and obstruct justice. That's not just illegal, it's treason." He stood and extended his hand to Robert. "I'm in, but we do this smart, no cowboy nonsense. We plan it right, execute it right, and come home alive to face whatever consequences follow." Robert shook his hand, feeling the strength in Doc's grip. "Agreed. We'll need your help coordinating with FBI contacts, confirming Brennan's status, setting up secure communications. I know a retired supervisory special agent, Dan Pritchard. He worked counterintelligence before he retired. If anyone can verify Holbrook's intel and help us coordinate with the Bureau, it's him." Doc pulled out his phone. "I'll reach out, see what he can tell us." While Doc made calls, Robert and Catherine continued refining the operational plan. They were deep into logistics when Doc returned an hour later, his expression grim. "Pritchard confirms it. Brennan is investigating military corruption. Webb is a protected witness. The Fort Irwin threat is real, but not from Webb. Vance hired a private military contractor to stage an attack. Create chaos, eliminate Webb and Brennan in the confusion, blame it on domestic terrorism." Catherine's face hardened. "How many contractors?" 12. All former special operations, well-equipped, well-trained. They're being positioned as event security, but their real orders are to initiate the attack when your shot is supposed to happen. Doc showed them photos on his phone. "Pritchard says the FBI wants to intervene, but they can't without proof. If they move too early, Vance's lawyers bury everything and walk. They need the operation to proceed far enough to document conspiracy and attempted murder." Robert felt cold certainty settle in his bones. "So we're bait. The FBI is using us to draw out Vance's people, just like Vance is using us to eliminate his problems." "Welcome to the intelligence community," Doc said dryly. "Nobody's clean, everyone's using everyone. But at least the FBI wants to catch Vance. That's better than nothing." Catherine looked between them. "So what's the play?" "We proceed with the mission as planned, knowing it's a setup, trying to stay alive long enough for the FBI to gather evidence." "Not quite," Robert pointed to the map. "We proceed with our modified plan. Get into position, wait for Vance's contractors to make their move. When they do, we don't take the shot at Webb. We take shots at the contractors, disable them, create enough chaos that the FBI can move in and secure the scene. Webb and Brennan stay alive. Contractors get arrested. Vance's conspiracy is exposed." Doc nodded slowly. "That could work, but it means you're engaging multiple hostiles at extreme range under combat conditions. And Walsh will know something's wrong the moment you divert from the target profile. Then we neutralize Walsh." Catherine's voice was cold. "Not lethally, just secure her when the time comes. Keep her from reporting until it's too late for Vance to adjust." Robert looked at his daughter and saw the warrior she had become. Hard when needed, flexible when required. willing to do what was necessary without losing sight of what was right. She was better than he had ever been. All right, Robert straightened. We have a plan. Now we need to execute. Doc, coordinate with Pritchard. Get us secure communications and FBI support. Catherine, brief your team on the position change. Make it sound like a tactical adjustment. I'll work the equipment and logistics. Doc hesitated. You know this is going to end badly for you both, right? Even if we succeed, even if we expose Vance and save lives, you're still going rogue. Courts, martial, dishonorable discharges, maybe prison. Catherine and Robert exchanged a look. Some communication passed between them that needed no words. Finally, Catherine spoke. My grandfather used to say, the hardest shot is the one you don't take, knowing when not to pull the trigger. But I think there's something even harder. Taking the shot you know will cost you everything. Doing what's right even when the price is too high. She straightened her shoulders. I'd rather face a court-martial with a clear conscience than follow orders that make me a murderer. Robert felt his throat tighten. She understood. After everything, after all the years in pain and distance, she understood what he had been trying to teach her. The third shot, the one that defines you. Not by what you kill, but by what you refuse to kill. By what you're willing to sacrifice to remain human. Then let's do this, Doc said quietly, and may God have mercy on us all. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of preparation. Catherine briefed her team on the position adjustment. The team accepted it without question because it made tactical sense. Only Lieutenant Walsh showed signs of suspicion, asking pointed questions about why the change was necessary now, so close to deployment. Catherine deflected smoothly, citing updated wind projections and terrain analysis. Walsh seemed satisfied but reported everything to her handlers. Robert knew because Doc's FBI contacts were monitoring her communications. Let her report. Let Vance think everything was proceeding normally. The surprise would come later. Robert spent his time preparing equipment and working through contingencies. His hands shook more each day. The cancer was progressing faster than the doctors predicted. Pain radiated from his chest and back constantly now. He hid it from Catherine as best he could, but Doc noticed. You're dying faster, Doc said bluntly on the evening before deployment. I know. Robert was cleaning his old Remington 700. He would not be shooting in the operation, but he wanted the rifle with him anyway. A talisman, a reminder of why he was doing this. You going to make it through the mission? I'll make it. Robert's voice was firm. I've got enough left for one more operation. After that, it doesn't matter. Doc was quiet for a moment. She needs you, you know, not just for the mission. She needs her father, even if she won't admit it. She needed her father 30 years ago. Now she just needs a teacher. Robert set down the cleaning rod. But I'll take what I can get. Better late than never. You're a stubborn old bastard. That's why we were friends. Robert managed to smile. You're a stubborn old bastard, too. Doc laughed quietly. Fair enough. Get some sleep, Hawk. Tomorrow's going to be hell. But sleep did not come easily. Robert lay in the hotel room, staring at the ceiling, thinking about tomorrow, about all the ways the operation could go wrong, about Catherine and the child she carried, about Morrison and the promise Robert had made 40 years ago to be a better father, about his own father and the lessons passed down through generations of warriors trying to do right in a world that made right so complicated. At 0300, his phone buzzed. A text from Catherine, simple and direct. Can't sleep. You? Robert typed back. Same. Scared. Me too. Good scared or bad scared? Robert thought about that. Good scared means we understand what matters. There was a long pause, then Catherine's reply came through. Thank you for everything, for coming back, for teaching me, for being honest about Beirut and Morrison and all of it. Whatever happens tomorrow, I wanted you to know. You gave me what I needed, even if it took 40 years. Robert felt tears sting his eyes. He wiped them away and typed back. You gave me what I needed too. A reason to be better, a chance to be a father. Forgiveness I didn't deserve but needed anyway. I'm proud of you, Kate. Not the shooter, you, the woman, the mother, the person who chose conscience over comfort. Your mother would be proud too. I miss her. I know, I do too. See you at 0500. I'll be there. Robert set down the phone and closed his eyes. Tomorrow they would go into the mountains. Tomorrow they would face an impossible situation with impossible stakes. Tomorrow they would make the shot that defined them both. But tonight, for just a moment, they were simply father and daughter, connected across the distance of years in pain by something stronger than both. Hope, forgiveness, love that survived despite every reason not to. It was enough. It had to be enough, because tomorrow there would be no room for sentiment, only skill and courage, and the willingness to pay whatever price was necessary to do right. Robert Mitchell fell asleep thinking about his father, about the lessons passed down, about the weight carried and the wisdom earned, about legacy and what it meant to leave something good behind. Tomorrow would be the third shot, the one that defined everything. Tomorrow they would see if 40 years of carrying weight had taught him enough to help his daughter carry hers. Tomorrow they would learn if redemption was real or just a story people told themselves to sleep at night. Tomorrow would tell the tale. But tonight, Robert slept without nightmares for the first time in decades. Tonight, he dreamed of Katherine as a little girl, learning to shoot with him beside her. The dream he never lived, but somehow, impossibly, was living now. It was enough. 0500 came cold and dark. The team assembled in the pre-dawn gloom, loading equipment into vehicles for the drive to the insertion point. Katherine moved with calm efficiency, checking gear and running through mental checklists. Lieutenant Walsh watched everything with sharp eyes, making notes on a tablet. Doc coordinated communications and logistics. Robert stayed in the background observing. The drive took 4 hours through desert terrain that grew progressively more hostile. Scrub brush gave way to rocky hills. Hills became mountains. Civilization fell away until there was nothing but stone and sky and the hard beauty of wilderness that cared nothing for human concerns. They reached the staging area at 0900. From here, it would be a 15-mile hike to the observation position, carrying heavy loads over difficult terrain, the kind of physical challenge that separated pretenders from professionals. Katherine's team moved with practiced efficiency, checking equipment one final time before beginning the infiltration. Walsh pulled Katherine aside. "Captain, I need to understand the position change. My orders were to observe from the original coordinates." "Your orders," Katherine said evenly, "are to observe the mission. The observation position is secondary to mission success. The new position provides better tactical advantage. That's all you need to know." Walsh's eyes narrowed. "I'll need to report the change." "Report whatever you need to report, Lieutenant, but do it while walking. We're behind schedule." Walsh looked like she wanted to argue but had no grounds to object. She fell in with the team, pulling out her satellite phone to make her report. Doc's FBI contacts would intercept the communication, but there was nothing suspicious in it yet. Just a liaison doing her job. The hike was brutal. Elevation gain of 3,000 feet over 15 miles. Temperature in the low 40s, but the exertion kept them warm. Each step was a negotiation between determination and the physical reality of climbing through terrain that did not care whether humans succeeded or failed. Loose scree made footing treacherous. Narrow paths forced single-file movement, where one misstep meant a fall that could end the mission before it started. Robert struggled more than he wanted to admit. His lungs burned with every breath, the cancer eating away at capacity he had once taken for granted. His chest ached with a deep, bone-level pain that radiated through his torso like fire. The backpack he carried felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, even though it was packed light. Every step was a battle against a body that was failing him systematically, organ by organ, cell by cell. His legs trembled on the steep sections. His vision blurred when he pushed too hard. Twice he had to stop and lean against rocks, pretending to check his bootlaces while he fought to control his breathing and keep from vomiting. The altitude was not helping. At 9,000 feet, there was 30% less oxygen than at sea level, and Robert's compromised lungs could not compensate the way they once had. But stopping was not an option. Showing weakness in front of Walsh would raise questions they could not afford to answer. Slowing the team would put the entire mission at risk. So Robert kept moving, one foot in front of the other, drawing on reserves of stubbornness that had been forged over 40 years of refusing to quit. The pain was temporary. The mission was permanent. He could rest when it was over. He could when it was done. Katherine noticed his struggle, but did not comment directly. Just slowed the pace slightly when Walsh was not looking, gave him moments to catch his breath under the pretense of checking navigation, made sure he had water during the brief rest stops. Small mercies that meant everything. The act of a daughter caring for her father even when both pretended it was something else. She would call for a map check when Robert needed to rest, would pause to glass the terrain ahead when his breathing became too labored, would position herself between him and Walsh's line of sight when he needed a moment to lean against a boulder and fight back the pain. Doc noticed too, but said nothing. Just stayed close to Robert during the movement, ready to help if needed, but respecting Robert's pride enough not to offer unless asked. The old Master Chief understood. Some things a man had to do himself. Some burdens could not be shared, no matter how heavy they became. The team moved through the afternoon heat that turned the mountains into wavering mirages. Sweat soaked through their clothing despite the cold. Muscles burned with lactic acid buildup. Joints protested the constant impact and irregular footing. This was why special operations selected for mental toughness as much as physical capability. Anyone could be strong in the gym. Few could be strong when every part of their body was screaming to stop. They crossed a ridge at hour 3, where the wind cut through their clothing like knives. Robert's hands were numb within minutes, his fingers stiff and uncooperative. The arthritis that plagued him had gotten worse in the cold, turning simple tasks like adjusting his pack straps into exercises in pain management. But he kept moving because the alternative was unthinkable. Behind him, Walsh was watching. Ahead of him, Katherine needed him to make it. There was no room for failure. At hour 4, they descended into a narrow canyon where the afternoon sun could not reach. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Robert's breath came in ragged gasps that turned to vapor in the cold air. His vision tunneled slightly, a warning sign that his oxygen saturation was dropping dangerously low. He grabbed a rock outcropping to steady himself, pretending to examine the route ahead while he fought to stay conscious. Katherine appeared beside him, her voice low. "You good?" "Fine," Robert lied. "You're not fine. You're gray and your lips are turning blue." Her hand was on his arm, steadying. "We can call an abort. Say you're having altitude sickness. Get you down to a hospital. And let Vance win? Let Brennan die? Let you become his assassin?" Robert forced himself to straighten. "Not happening. I'll make it." Katherine's eyes were worried, but she nodded. 30 more minutes to the ridge. Can you do 30 minutes? "I can do whatever I need to do." Robert managed a smile that probably looked more like a grimace. "I'm not dying until this is done." "Too stubborn." "You're definitely stubborn." Katherine squeezed his arm. "That's the one thing I got from you that I'm grateful for." They continued moving. The canyon opened onto a final steep ascent, the kind of climb that tested even healthy bodies. Robert attacked it with grim determination, using his hands as much as his feet, pulling himself up over rocks that scraped his palms and tested his balance. Walsh was behind them, probably noting every difficulty, every sign of weakness. Let her note, let her report. By the time her reports reached Vance, it would be too late. The ridge appeared ahead like a promise. Katherine reached it first and immediately began scouting for the best observation position. Doc arrived second and started setting up communications. Robert pulled himself over the final boulder and collapsed behind cover, his entire body shaking with exhaustion and oxygen deprivation. Doc appeared with water and a small oxygen canister from the medical kit. "Breathe this. Don't argue." Robert took the oxygen mask and breathed deep. The pure O2 helped immediately, clearing his vision and easing the crushing sensation in his chest. After 2 minutes, he could speak without gasping. "Don't tell Katherine. She already knows." Doc sat beside him. "You're not hiding it as well as you think, but she's choosing to let you do this your way. Honor that by staying alive long enough to finish it." Robert handed back the oxygen. "I'll make it, just need a minute." "You've got 5. Then we're operational and you need to be functional." Doc's voice was gentle but firm. "Can you be functional?" "Yes." Robert forced himself to sit up straighter. "The hard part's over. Now it's just observation and decision-making. I can do that." Doc studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but you're staying on oxygen until we're done here. Non-negotiable." Robert did not argue. He was too tired to argue and too smart to refuse help when his body was this close to shutdown. The cancer was winning, but it did not need to win today. Just a few more hours, just long enough to see this through. They reached the ridge at 1400 hours precisely. The position offered commanding views of the valley below, exactly as the maps had promised. 3,000 meters away, barely visible even with high-power optics, was the compound where this drama would play out. The distance was almost incomprehensible. 2 miles, the length of 30 football fields. Far enough that sound took 9 seconds to travel. Far enough that the bullet would be in the air for almost 5 seconds. far enough that a million variables could push the shot off target. But Katherine was ready, had trained for this, had learned not just the mathematics, but the art of extreme long-range shooting, had absorbed everything Robert could teach and made it her own. Katherine set up her hide with practiced efficiency, camouflage netting, observation position, shooting position, ballistic computer, weather station, everything needed for an extreme long-range shot. Doc established communications. Walsh set up her observation equipment and continued making notes. Robert positioned himself where he could see both the target area and Katherine. His role now was purely advisory. He could not shoot anymore, but he could guide, could teach, could be present for his daughter when the moment of truth arrived. The waiting began. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. The sun tracked across the sky. Temperature fluctuated. Wind patterns shifted. Katherine monitored everything, making adjustments to her data, preparing for a shot that would not come the way command expected. At 1800 hours, Doc's secure radio crackled. Movement in the valley, multiple vehicles approaching the compound. Katherine trained her optics on the road. 6 SUVs, black and unmarked. The contractors Vance had hired to stage the attack and eliminate his problems. They were arriving early, probably to scout the area and position themselves before the family event tomorrow. Confirmed 12 individuals, Katherine reported quietly, heavily armed, military bearing, setting up a perimeter around the compound. Those are Vance's people, Robert said, the ones who are supposed to make this look like a terrorist attack. Walsh looked up sharply. What are you talking about? Katherine ignored her, focused on the scene below. 2 individuals exiting the compound. One male, 40s, gray suit. Second male, 30s, casual clothes. That must be Brennan and Webb. Through the scope, Robert could see the confrontation developing. The contractors surrounding the 2 men, weapons visible but not yet raised. A standoff. The contractors probably had orders to wait until the shot was supposed to happen, to time the attack with Katherine's operation for maximum confusion. Walsh, step away from your equipment. Doc's voice was flat and hard. Excuse me? Walsh reached for her phone. Doc moved faster than his age suggested possible, securing Walsh's arms and removing her communication devices. Lieutenant, you're under observation for suspected conspiracy to obstruct justice. You will remain secured and silent until further notice. Walsh struggled. This is mutiny. I'll have you all court-martialed. Get in line, Katherine said without looking away from her scope. Doc, secure her. Robert, I need atmospheric readings. Robert moved to the weather station, reading data while Doc restrained Walsh with zip ties and improvised gag. Professional, efficient, necessary. When you chose to go rogue, you went all the way. The situation in the valley was deteriorating. The contractors were moving closer to Brennan and Webb, weapons being raised, the pretense of peaceful contact ending. In moments, they would open fire and Vance's problems would be eliminated along with any chance of justice. Range 3,200 meters, Katherine said. Wind 3 miles per hour from the northwest. Temperature 48 degrees, barometric pressure holding steady. She made adjustments to her scope. I have solutions for all 12 targets, but at this range, I can't guarantee all shots before they return fire on the compound. You don't need all 12, Robert said, just their leader. Take him out and the others will scatter. They're mercenaries, not fanatics. They won't continue the attack if their commander is down. Katherine centered her scope on the lead contractor. A man in his 50s, with the build of someone who had spent a lifetime in special operations. Probably former Delta or SEAL, now working for the highest bidder. He was giving orders, positioning his men for the assault. Confirmed target, Katherine said. Leader, 6'2", black jacket, standing next to the lead vehicle. Confirmed, Robert replied. Wind holding steady. You have a shot. Katherine settled into her breathing. The rifle became an extension of her body. All the training, all the preparation, all the philosophy distilled into this single moment. Not the shot command ordered, not the mission that served corruption, but the right shot. The one that saved innocent lives. The one that defined who she chose to be. Firing, Katherine said quietly. The Beirut roared. Recoil slammed into her shoulder. The bullet began its 4.6-second journey across 3,000 meters of mountain air. Robert watched through his spotting scope. Watched the contractor leader standing there, unaware death was traveling toward him at supersonic speed. Watched him start to turn, start to give an order, start to motion toward Brennan. Impact. The contractor's chest exploded. He went down hard and stayed down. The other contractors scattered, diving for cover, trying to locate the shooter. But at 3,000 meters with a suppressed weapon, they had no idea where the shot came from. Catherine was already working the bolt, chambering the next round, acquiring the second target. Engaging hostile two, another shot, another impact. A contractor went down, wounded but alive. The others were in full retreat now, scrambling for their vehicles. Whatever they had been paid, it was not enough to stand in the open against an invisible sniper who could kill at extreme range. "Hold fire," Doc said into the radio. "FBI is moving. Pritchard's team is 30 seconds out." 3 black SUVs roared into the valley. FBI emblems now visible. Federal agents in tactical gear deployed rapidly, securing the scene, rounding up the contractors who were too smart to resist. It was over in less than 5 minutes. Vance's conspiracy exposed. His mercenaries captured. Brennan and Webb safe. Catherine set down the rifle and looked at Robert. "We did it." "You did it," Robert corrected. "You made the third shot, the one that defines you. Not by following orders, but by following conscience. Not by killing who they told you to kill, but by protecting who needed protecting." Tears were streaming down Catherine's face, but she was smiling. "I'm probably going to prison." "Maybe." Robert reached out and took her hand. "But you'll go with a clear conscience, and that's worth more than any career." They sat together on the ridge, watching the FBI agents secure the scene below. Walsh was still tied up, furious but helpless. Doc was on the radio coordinating with Pritchard. The mission was over. The consequences were just beginning. But for this moment, this one perfect moment, Robert and Catherine were just father and daughter. Together, partners. Sharing the weight of an impossible choice and the satisfaction of having chosen right. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Beautiful and indifferent. The world kept turning, whether humans chose right or wrong, whether they lived or died, whether they found redemption or carried guilt forever. But tonight, on this ridge, 2 people had chosen right, had made the hard choice, had paid the price for conscience and found it bearable because they paid it together. Tomorrow would bring courts-martial and investigations and all the machinery of justice grinding forward. Tomorrow would be hard, but tonight they had this moment, this choice, this shot that defined them both. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. Robert closed his eyes and breathed deep. The mountain air was cold and clean. His chest hurt and his hands shook, and death was coming sooner rather than later. But he had lived long enough to see his daughter become the warrior he never was, the person he should have been, the human who could kill and still remain human. That was legacy. That was redemption. That was grace. And it was enough. The sunset faded to twilight, and twilight faded to darkness. Catherine and Robert sat on the ridge long after the FBI had secured the scene below, long after the contractors had been loaded into vehicles and driven away in handcuffs, long after the evidence had been collected and the reports had been filed. They sat in the cold mountain air, watching stars emerge in the desert sky, neither speaking because there were no words adequate for what they had just done. They had succeeded. The mission was complete. Innocent lives had been saved. Vance's conspiracy was exposed. Everything had gone as well as could be hoped given impossible circumstances. And yet Robert felt no triumph, only exhaustion in the certain knowledge that the hardest part was still coming. The shooting was over. Now came the reckoning. Doc approached quietly, his footsteps deliberate so as not to startle. "FBI wants statements. Pritchard says we need to come down tonight. Military police are waiting at the staging area." Catherine nodded but did not stand. "They're arresting us. Detaining for questioning. Different word, same handcuffs." Doc sat down beside them. "For what it's worth, Pritchard says you did the right thing, saved lives, exposed corruption. But right doesn't mean legal." "I know." Catherine finally stood, moving stiffly after hours in position. "How bad is it going to be?" Doc's expression was somber. "Captain, you disobeyed direct orders, assaulted a superior officer, conducted an unauthorized military operation on U.S. soil, and discharged weapons in violation of your rules of engagement. The Navy is going to throw every charge they can think of at you. Court-martial, dishonorable discharge, prison time, years of it." Catherine absorbed this without visible emotion. "And Robert? Same charges. Maybe worse because they'll say he corrupted you, that his influence caused you to go rogue." Doc looked at Robert. They'll paint you as a bitter old veteran with a grudge against the system, manipulating his daughter to settle old scores. Robert pushed himself to his feet, his body protesting every movement. The exertion of the day had depleted what little reserves he had left. His chest felt like someone had packed it with broken glass. His hands shook worse than ever. But he forced himself to stand straight, to meet Doc's eyes with what dignity remained. Let them paint me however they want. I've been called worse by better people. Robert turned to Katherine. But you need to start building your defense now. You followed my advice. I'm retired, no authority over you. You can claim I misled you, that I presented false intelligence, that you were following what you believed was legitimate information from a senior officer. I'm not throwing you to the wolves, Katherine's voice was sharp. We made this choice together. We face the consequences together. You're pregnant. Robert said it quietly but firmly. You have a child to think about. A future that matters more than protecting an old man who's dying anyway. Tell them I manipulated you. Tell them whatever you need to tell them. But don't sacrifice your life for mine. I'm not worth it. Katherine stepped close to him, close enough that he could see the tears gathering in her eyes even in the darkness. You are worth it. For the first time in 40 years, you're acting like my father. Like someone who puts others before himself. Like someone worth knowing. Her voice broke. Don't ask me to betray that. Don't ask me to become the person who abandons family to save herself. The words hit Robert like physical blows. He had spent decades running from family, from responsibility, from love. And now his daughter was refusing to do the same thing even when it would save her. She was better than him, stronger than him, more human than him. Everything he should have been and never was. All right, Robert's voice was rough. We face it together, whatever comes. Doc stood and adjusted his pack. Then we better get moving. It's a long walk down and they're not patient people. The descent took 4 hours in darkness, using night vision equipment to navigate terrain that was treacherous even in daylight. Robert fell twice, caught by Katherine before he could tumble down slopes that would have killed him. His body was shutting down systematically, the cancer and exhaustion and altitude combining into a perfect storm of physical failure. But he kept moving because the alternative was being carried, and he would walk off this mountain on his own feet or die trying. Walsh walked in sullen silence, her hands still zip-tied, a gag removed so she could drink water, but replaced immediately after. She was evidence now, a witness to their insubordination and proof of Vance's conspiracy all at once. Her fate was tied to theirs in ways she probably had not yet realized. They reached the staging area at 0200 hours. 6 military police vehicles waited, engines running, headlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights. A dozen MPS in full tactical gear, weapons visible but not raised. Behind them stood 2 Navy JAG officers in dress uniforms looking official and severe. Katherine set down her equipment with careful precision and placed her hands behind her head without being asked. Robert did the same, moving slowly so no one would interpret his trembling as resistance. Doc followed suit. 3 professional warriors submitting to authority even as they knew that authority was about to destroy them. The senior MP, a staff sergeant with 20 years of service visible in his weathered face, approached with handcuffs. Captain Mitchell, Colonel Mitchell, Master Chief Harrison, you are under arrest for violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, including Article 92, dereliction of duty, Article 94, mutiny and sedition, and Article 85, desertion. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court-martial. The handcuffs clicked closed around Robert's wrists. Cold metal, familiar weight. He had put handcuffs on prisoners 100 times in his career. Never thought he would wear them himself. The irony was not lost on him. They were separated immediately. Katherine into one vehicle, Robert into another, Doc into a third. Standard procedure to prevent coordination of stories. As if 3 professional operators needed to be in the same vehicle to coordinate. They had already agreed on the truth, the whole truth. Let the chips fall where they may. The drive back to Naval Base Coronado took 6 hours with stops at checkpoints where paperwork was signed and custody was transferred, and the machinery of military justice ground forward with bureaucratic efficiency. Robert sat in the back of an armored transport, hands cuffed, body aching, mind drifting. He thought about Morrison, about Beirut, about all the times he had followed orders without question and how it had led to tragedy. And he thought about Catherine, about her courage, about her choice to do right even when the cost was everything. He had given her one good thing in his miserable life. He had taught her that conscience mattered more than career, that some orders should not be followed, that being human was more important than being a weapon. If he died in prison for that lesson, it would still be worth it. The sun was rising when they arrived at Coronado. Robert was taken to the brig, a small holding facility designed for short-term detention of personnel awaiting court-martial. 6 cells, concrete walls, narrow windows high up that let in light but showed nothing of the outside world. He was processed, photographed, fingerprinted, searched, and locked in cell 3. The door clanged shut with the finality of judgment. Robert sat on the narrow bunk and looked at his hands. They were shaking worse than ever. The pain in his chest had become a constant companion, a burning pressure that made every breath an effort. He knew what was happening. The stress and exertion had accelerated the cancer's progression. His body was shutting down faster than the doctors predicted. He probably had weeks left, maybe days if the stress continued. But he had made it, had lived long enough to teach Catherine, long enough to stop Vance from using her, long enough to make one thing right in a lifetime of wrongs. That had to be enough. That had to count for something. The first interrogation came 6 hours later. 2 JAG officers, both commanders, both with the crisp efficiency of lawyers who had won more cases than they had lost. They sat across a metal table from Robert in a windowless room that smelled of industrial cleaner and old coffee. A recording device sat between them, red light blinking to indicate everything was being preserved for posterity. Colonel Mitchell, do you understand the charges against you? Yes. Do you wish to have counsel present? No, I'll tell you exactly what happened and why. No games, no spin, just the truth. The lawyers exchanged glances. They had probably expected denials, deflection, the usual dance of someone facing serious charges. Robert's directness seemed to throw them. Very well. In your own words, describe the events that led to yesterday's unauthorized operation. Robert told them everything. His investigation into the mission parameters, his meeting with Holbrook, the evidence of Vance's conspiracy, the decision to go rogue, Catherine's involvement, Doc's support, the modified plan, the execution. All of it laid out with the same clinical precision he would use for an after-action report. The lawyers took notes, asked clarifying questions, probed for inconsistencies. Robert answered everything honestly because lies would only make it worse, and the truth was damning enough without embellishment. Colonel, you're aware that your allegations against Senator Vance are extremely serious. I'm aware that his actions in Beirut killed 8 Marines, including my best friend. I'm aware that he was attempting to use my daughter to commit murder. I'm aware that he's been corrupt for 40 years and the system has protected him because he has dirt on everyone. Robert met their eyes. And I'm aware that telling you this probably doesn't matter because he's too connected to prosecute and I'm too expendable to protect. The senior lawyer, a woman in her 40s with gray at her temples and sharp eyes, leaned forward. The FBI has confirmed the essential elements of your story. Marcus Webb is a protected witness. Special Agent Brennan was investigating corruption. The contractors were hired by parties unknown to stage an attack. You and Captain Mitchell did prevent a conspiracy to commit murder. She paused, letting that sink in. However, that doesn't change the fact that you disobeyed orders, conducted an unauthorized operation, and assaulted a superior officer. The ends don't justify the means, Colonel. Not in the military, not anywhere. I know. Robert's voice was steady. But given the choice between following corrupt orders and saving innocent lives, I'd make the same choice again. Every time. Court-martial me. Send me to prison. Take my pension. But don't pretend that following orders is always right. Sometimes it's just cowardice with a uniform. The lawyer's expression flickered with something that might have been respect. You'll have your court-martial, Colonel, and you'll have your chance to make that argument. But I'll be honest with you. Even with the FBI's confirmation, even with evidence of conspiracy, the Navy is not going to let this slide. You made them look bad. You exposed corruption at high levels. You embarrassed powerful people. They're going to crucify you to send a message that insubordination has consequences. Let them. Robert felt the weight settling on him and accepted it. As long as my daughter gets a fair hearing, as long as her career and future are protected, that's all I care about. The lawyer gathered her papers. Captain Mitchell is being interrogated separately. Her story matches yours in all material details. That works in her favor. Coordination of testimony suggests you're both telling the truth rather than covering up crimes. She stood to leave, but paused at the door. For what it's worth, Colonel, my father was at the Beirut barracks bombing. He survived, but 8 of his friends didn't. If what you say about Vance is true, if he really did orchestrate that building demolition, then you did the right thing stopping him from killing again. Her voice softened. Doesn't mean the Navy won't prosecute you, but it means some of us understand why you did it. After she left, Robert was returned to his cell. The walls seemed to be closing in, not from claustrophobia, but from certainty. This was it, the end of his military career, the end of his freedom, the end of everything except the cancer eating him from inside. He had known the price when he made the choice, but knowing and experiencing were different things. The pain in his chest was getting worse, sharp stabbing sensations that radiated down his left arm. He tried to breathe through it, but each breath felt like inhaling fire. This was not stress. This was something acute, something cardiac. The cancer had probably metastasized to his heart, or the exertion had triggered a coronary event. Either way, his body was giving up. Robert lay down on the narrow bunk and closed his eyes. If he was going to die, this was not a bad place for it. He had done what he came to do, had taught his daughter, had stopped Vance, had made one thing right. That was more than he deserved, more than he had any right to expect. The darkness at the edges of his vision was expanding. His heartbeat was irregular, fluttering like a bird with a broken wing. He thought about Katherine, about the child she carried, about legacy and what it meant to pass something good forward. He thought about Morrison and the promise he had made to be a better father. He thought about his own father and the lessons learned in Wyoming fields 50 years ago. He hoped Katherine would understand, would forgive him for dying before the court-martial, would know that he loved her even if he had never been good at showing it, would teach her child about choosing right over easy, would carry forward the lessons and make them matter. The cell door opened with a clang that pulled Robert back from the edge. He opened his eyes to see Doc standing there with a medic behind him. "You're having a heart attack, you stubborn bastard." Doc's voice was rough with emotion. I could see it in the interrogation footage. "Called medical. They're taking you to the hospital." "No." Robert tried to sit up but did not have the strength. "Let it happen. Better to die free than in a cell." "Free?" Doc knelt beside the bunk. "You're not free. You're in the brig facing charges. And you're not dying here. Katherine needs you to survive long enough to see this through, to testify, to make sure Vance faces justice. You don't get to quit now." The medics moved in with practiced efficiency. Vital signs checked. IV started. Oxygen mask applied. Robert wanted to fight, but his body would not cooperate. He was loaded onto a gurney and wheeled out of the cell, down corridors that smelled of disinfectant and despair, into an ambulance that raced through morning traffic with sirens wailing. The Naval Medical Center emergency room was controlled chaos. Doctors shouting orders, nurses moving with purpose, equipment beeping and humming. Robert drifted in and out of consciousness as they worked on him, stabilizing his heart rhythm, managing his pain, running tests to determine how much damage the cancer and stress had caused. He woke fully in a hospital room with monitors surrounding him and tubes running into his arms. Katherine sat beside the bed, still in her tactical fatigues, her hands cuffed in front of her. 2 MPs stood by the door. She had been allowed to visit under guard, a mercy he had not expected. "You scared me." Katherine's voice was thick. "They said you almost died in the cell." "Almost." Robert's voice was weak. "But Doc's too mean to let me escape that easily." Katherine tried to smile, but it did not reach her eyes. "The doctors say you have maybe 2 weeks, maybe less. The stress accelerated everything. Your heart is failing. Your lungs are failing. Your kidneys are starting to shut down." "I know." Robert looked at their reflection in the window. Father and daughter. Oof. Both in custody, both facing ruin, both choosing it deliberately. "I'm sorry I won't be here for the trial. Won't be able to testify. Won't be able to help defend you." "You already helped me." Katherine reached out and took his hand despite the handcuffs. "You taught me what matters." You showed me how to choose right, even when it costs everything. You gave me a reason to believe that honor still means something. Her voice broke. You were a terrible father for 28 years, but these last 2 weeks, you were everything I needed, everything I never knew I was missing. And I need you to know that I forgive you for leaving, for being absent, for all of it. I forgive you. Robert felt tears slide down his face. I don't deserve that. No, you don't. Catherine squeezed his hand. But I'm giving it anyway, because that's what love does. It forgives the unforgivable. It chooses grace over justice. It breaks the cycle. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. I'm going to name the baby after you if it's a boy. Robert Morrison Mitchell, after you and the friend you lost. So your legacy isn't just the mistakes. It's also the lesson, the choice, the stand you took at the end. Robert could not speak, could not find words adequate for what he felt. So he just held her hand and let the tears fall and hoped she understood that sometimes silence said more than any speech could convey. The door opened and a doctor entered, professional but compassionate. Captain, I'm sorry, but visiting time is over. The colonel needs rest. Catherine stood but did not release Robert's hand immediately. I'll come back tomorrow. You better still be alive. I'll try. Robert managed a smile. But I'm not making promises my body can't keep. After she left, the doctor checked monitors and adjusted medications. Colonel, your heart sustained significant damage. The cancer has spread to the cardiac tissue. We can manage your pain and keep you comfortable, but there's no reversing this. You're in palliative care now. Quality of life over quantity. How long? Days, maybe a week if you're strong, but you need to prepare yourself and your family. Robert nodded. He had known this was coming, had felt death approaching like a tide. The only surprise was that he had made it this long, had lived to see Catherine become the warrior she was meant to be, had lived to teach her one good thing. Can I have visitors? Immediate family only, and only with supervision. The doctor's expression softened. I'll do what I can to make the time meaningful. You've served your country for 40 years. You deserve dignity at the end. After the doctor left, Robert lay in the hospital bed listening to monitors beep and watching light patterns play across the ceiling. His mind drifted across decades of service. Vietnam, Beirut, Somalia, Iraq, Afghanistan. 40 years of following orders and carrying bodies and trying to reconcile duty with conscience. 40 years of getting it wrong more often than right. But at the end, he had gotten one thing right. One choice that mattered. One stand that meant something. Catherine would survive the court-martial. The evidence would exonerate her even if it did not excuse her. She would raise her child and pass on the lessons and make the legacy something worth having. That was enough. That was grace. That was redemption earned one painful step at a time. Robert closed his eyes and let himself drift. The pain was less now with medication flowing. The fear was gone because there was nothing left to fear. He had done what he came to do, had paid what he owed, had made peace with the woman he loved most in the world, even if it took 40 years to get there. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. A woman in her late 60s, still beautiful despite the weight of years and grief, her silver hair pulled back in a simple bun. Two men in their 40s bearing the marks of military service in their bearing and scars, and the way they carried themselves with that particular awareness that came from training and deployment. Robert recognized them immediately, even though he had not seen them since they were boys crying at their father's funeral 37 years ago. Susan Morrison and her sons, David Jr. and Michael, Morrison's family, the people Robert had orphaned in Beirut 40 years ago, the ghost that had haunted him through decades of guilt and isolation. Susan sat down beside the bed with careful dignity, moving like someone who had learned to carry grief with grace. Her sons stood behind her like honor guards, protective but allowing their mother to lead. The silence stretched for a long moment before she spoke, and when she did, her voice carried the weight of 4 decades of unanswered questions. Master Chief Harrison called me last week, told me about Senator Vance, about what really happened in Beirut, about the building demolition being deliberate, not an accident or enemy action. Her voice was steady, but Robert could hear the anger underneath, the fury of someone who had been lied to for 40 years. My husband didn't die in combat. He died to cover up a traitor's crimes. He died protecting secrets that should have been exposed. He died because powerful men valued money and reputation more than the lives of 8 Marines. She paused, her hands clenched in her lap. For 37 years, I told myself that David died a hero, that his sacrifice meant something, that he felt protecting his country and his brothers in arms. And that was true, in a way. But the full truth is that he was murdered, used and discarded by someone who should have been court-martialed and instead became a senator. I'm sorry. The words felt inadequate, hollow against the magnitude of what had been stolen from here. I've spent 40 years wishing I could take back that shot, wishing I had questioned the orders, wishing I had seen through the mission parameters to the corruption underneath, wishing I had saved him. You couldn't have saved him. Susan's eyes were wet, but her voice was firm, steady with a conviction that came from long contemplation. I've thought about this every day since Doc called, played it out in my mind 1,000 different ways. And the truth is, if you had refused the shot, someone else would have taken it. If you had questioned the orders, they would have replaced you with someone more obedient. Vance planned that demolition carefully. David was going to die that day, no matter what you did or didn't do. She leaned forward, her gaze intense. But you could have told me the truth afterward. You could have come to the funeral. You could have let me know that someone remembered who David was and what he meant, that someone carried the weight of his death with them, that he wasn't just another casualty statistic in some classified report. Robert forced himself to meet her gaze, even though it hurt worse than the cancer. I was a coward. I ran because I couldn't face what I'd done. Couldn't face you and your sons. Couldn't handle the responsibility of being the man who pulled the trigger that killed their father. I told myself I was protecting you from painful contact. But really, I was protecting myself from having to be human, from having to feel. Yes, Susan's voice was gentle but uncompromising. You were a coward, but you were also in pain. And humans in pain do stupid, hurtful things. We run, we hide. We choose isolation over connection because connection means vulnerability, and vulnerability means more pain. She reached out and took his hand with both of hers, and Robert felt the warmth of her touch like absolution. But you're not running now. You're facing it, fighting it. You stood up against the man who killed my husband when it cost you everything you had left. You chose to save other lives even though it meant your own death would come sooner and harder. You taught your daughter to be brave when the system wanted her to be obedient. That's not cowardice, Robert. That's courage of a kind most people never find. David Jr. spoke for the first time, his voice a deeper version of his father's, carrying that same thoughtful cadence that Robert remembered from late-night conversations in Beirut. Colonel, when Dad died, I hated you. The Marine who took the shot, the sniper who brought down that building. Mom tried to tell me it wasn't your fault, that you were just following orders. But I was 8 years old and I needed someone to blame. So I blamed you. He moved closer to the bed, and Robert could see Morrison in the set of his jaw, in the color of his eyes, in the way he held himself. For years I blamed you, thought if you had been better, faster, more careful, more aware, Dad would still be alive. I imagined you as this callous killer who didn't care who died as long as the mission was complete. I dreamed about confronting you someday, making you answer for what you took from us. His voice softened. But now I know the truth. You were just a weapon aimed at a target by someone who didn't care about collateral damage. You were 23 years old, following orders from officers you trusted, believing you were saving lives. And when you realized what had really happened, when you learned the truth about Vance's conspiracy, you didn't forget. You didn't move on. You carried Dad's death with you for 40 years. David Jr.'s eyes were wet now. And at the end, when you realized Vance was about to use your daughter the same way he used you, you stood up. You risked everything to stop him. You taught Captain Mitchell that some orders shouldn't be followed, that conscience matters more than career, that being human is more important than being a perfect soldier. He extended his hand. That takes courage, sir. More courage than following orders ever requires. You stood up when it mattered most. You fought back when you had nothing left to fight with. You made sure Vance couldn't hurt anyone else. Dad would have respected that. Hell, Dad would have done the same thing. Michael, the younger son, spoke next. He was quieter than his brother, more reserved, but his words carried weight. I was 6 when Dad died. I barely remember him, just fragments. His voice, his laugh, the way he used to lift me onto his shoulders. Mom kept his memory alive with stories and photos, but it's not the same as having him. He looked at Robert with something like understanding. Growing up without a father makes you angry, makes you wonder if you're enough, if you matter, if you can be the man your dad wanted you to become when you don't even know who that man is supposed to be. I joined the Marines because I thought it would help me understand Dad. Thought maybe if I walked the same path, I'd feel closer to him. Michael's voice caught. And you know what I learned? I learned that Dad was a good man who tried to do right in a world that didn't always reward that. I learned that he loved Mom and me and David more than anything. I learned that he died trying to save people, even if the people he was really saving turned out to be corrupt. He moved to stand beside his brother. So when I hear that you've spent 40 years carrying Dad's death like a millstone, when I hear that you sacrificed everything at the end to make sure his death counted for something, when I see you lying here dying because as you finally chose conscience over comfort, I don't feel anger anymore. I feel something like kinship because you love Dad too, in your way, enough to carry him, enough to avenge him, enough to make his death mean something. Susan squeezed Robert's hand again, drawing his attention back to her. I'm not here to forgive you, Robert. Forgiveness isn't something I can give for pain you inflicted on yourself. But I am here to release you from the debt you think you owe us. David's death wasn't your fault. The weight you've carried for 40 years, you've carried it long enough. You've suffered enough. You've paid enough. You can put it down now. Her voice broke with emotion. David would want that. He would want you to know that his sons grew up strong and brave, that they honor his memory by living good lives and serving others, that his death, while tragic and wrong and caused by evil men, didn't break us. We survived. We thrived. We loved. And part of why we could do that was knowing that somewhere, someone remembered, someone carried, someone cared. She stood and leaned down to kiss his forehead, and Robert felt moisture on his face that was not his own tears. Rest well, Colonel. You've carried enough weight for one lifetime. You've fought enough battles. You've suffered enough for sins that weren't yours to bear. Let go now. Let go and find peace. Robert felt something inside him crack and break open. 40 years of guilt. 40 years of carrying Morrison's death like a stone around his neck. And here was his widow, his sons, telling him he could let it go, that he had suffered enough. That redemption was possible. Thank you. His voice was barely a whisper. Thank you for giving me this, for not hating me, for understanding. Susan stood and leaned down to kiss his forehead. Rest well, Colonel. You've carried enough weight for one lifetime. After they left, Robert lay in the hospital bed and felt lighter than he had in decades. The weight was still there. The pain was still there. The cancer was still killing him. But something fundamental had shifted. He was no longer the Marine who killed his best friend. He was the father who saved his daughter. He was the warrior who chose conscience over orders. He was the man who stood up at the end. That was enough. That was everything. The final visitors came that evening. Senator Harold Vance, still free, still powerful, still dangerous. He arrived without fanfare, just an old man in an expensive suit, flanked by lawyers and Secret Service protection. He dismissed everyone from the room except Robert. They faced each other across 4 decades of conflict and conspiracy. You think you've won? Vance's voice was cold. You think exposing my operations, arresting my contractors, turning your daughter into a martyr will bring me down, but you're wrong. Robert waited, conserving energy. I have friends in every agency. I have leverage on every committee. I have enough dirt on enough people to make this all go away. Vance leaned closer. Your daughter will go to prison. Your friend Harrison will lose his pension. And I will walk away from this like I've walked away from everything else. Maybe, Robert's voice was weak but steady, but you'll know. You'll spend the rest of your life knowing that a dying old man and his daughter stopped you, that your corruption is documented, that your legacy is poison, that history will remember you as a traitor who sold out his country for money. Vance's face darkened. History is written by winners, and I'm still winning. No, Robert smiled despite the pain. You're surviving. There's a difference. Winning means you build something worth having. Surviving just means you're too evil to die. And eventually, even survival runs out. Vance stood abruptly. Enjoy your last days, Mitchell. I'll make sure your daughter spends her best years in prison thinking about how her father's principles destroyed her life. After Vance left, Robert felt the darkness closing in again. The cardiac monitors were showing irregular rhythms. The pain was building despite the medication. His body was shutting down system by system, but he had lived long enough to see Vance's face, to tell the man who killed Morrison that his evil was known. That was worth the cost. Doc appeared at the door, his weathered face creased with worry. You should be resting, not entertaining senators who want you dead. Had to see him, had to let him know he lost, even if he won't admit it. Robert's breathing was labored. Did Catherine's interrogation go all right? As well as can be expected, the JAG officers believe her story. The FBI is backing her version of events. But the Navy still wants charges pressed. Too much insubordination to overlook. Doc sat down heavily. There's talk of a deal, reduced charges in exchange for cooperation. But Katherine won't take it unless you're included. Tell her to take the deal. Robert's voice was firm despite his weakness. Tell her I order her to take it. Tell her I'm dying anyway and she has a child to think about. You tell her. Doc's expression was sad. She's coming back tomorrow. Final visit? After that, they're transferring you to hospice care. The court-martial will proceed without you. Robert nodded. He had known this was coming, had accepted it. The only thing that mattered now was making sure Katherine understood, that she took the deal, that she survived to raise her child and carry forward the lessons. That was the legacy. That was what made all of it worthwhile. That night, Robert dreamed of Montana, of his cabin in the mountains, of the rifle on his kitchen table, of the photographs on his wall. But in the dream, Katherine was there, and she was smiling. And they were cleaning rifles together the way fathers and daughters should, the way he never did when it mattered, the way it could have been if he had been braver. He woke to morning light in the knowledge that this was his last full day of consciousness. The doctors had increased his pain medication to levels that would soon make communication impossible. After today, he would drift in and out of awareness until the cancer finally stopped his heart. But today he would see his daughter one more time, would tell her he was proud, would make her promise to survive, would give her the blessing every child deserves from their father, even when that father does not deserve to give it. Katherine arrived at noon, still handcuffed, still under guard, but her face was calm, resolved. She sat beside his bed and took his hand, and they sat in silence for long moments because sometimes silence was all the communication love needed. Doc says they offered you a deal, Robert said finally. I'm not taking it. You have to. I'm not abandoning you, not leaving you to face this alone, not becoming the person who chooses safety over family. Catherine's voice was fierce. You taught me that. You stood up when it mattered. I'm standing too. Robert felt pride and sorrow war in his chest. I'm dying, Kate, probably tonight or tomorrow. The court-martial will proceed without me. Your standing with me just means you go to prison for longer. I don't care, but I do. Robert squeezed her hand with what strength remained. I care about your future, about your child, about the life you deserve to live. Take the deal. Cooperate. Get reduced charges. Stay out of prison long enough to be a mother. Catherine's tears fell freely now. How can I do that? How can I live with abandoning you? You're not abandoning me. You're honoring me by choosing life, by choosing your child, by carrying forward the lessons and making them matter. Robert's voice was fading. I've got days left, hours maybe, but you've got decades, generations, a child who needs you and a legacy that deserves to be more than tragedy. He pulled her closer with effort that cost him everything. Promise me you'll take the deal. You'll raise your child, you'll teach them what matters. You'll tell them about Morrison and Beirut and the third shot that defines us. You'll make this mean something. Katherine sobbed against his chest. I promise, but you have to promise me something too. What? That you'll wait for me, on the other side, with Mom, with Morrison, with everyone we lost. That you'll be watching when I teach my child to shoot, when I tell the stories, when I carry it forward. Promise me you'll know that none of it was wasted. I promise. Robert held her as tightly as his failing body allowed. I'll be watching, always watching, every moment, every choice, every lesson passed forward. I'll see it all, and I'll be proud. They sat together until the guard said time was up. Katherine kissed his forehead, told him she loved him, walked away crying but with her shoulders straight and her head high. The warrior and the daughter, everything he should have raised her to be, Everything she became despite him. Robert lay back and let the darkness come. The pain was distant now. The fear was gone. He had done what he came to do, had paid what he owed, had earned just enough grace to die with something like peace. The monitors began alarming. Nurses rushed in, doctors shouted orders. But Robert was already gone, drifting away on a tide of morphine and acceptance. His last thoughts were of Katherine, of the child she carried, of legacy and redemption and love that survived 40 years of absence. He died at 14:23 hours on a November afternoon with sunshine streaming through hospital windows and his daughter's promise echoing in his mind. Died knowing he had finally been a father. Finally taught something worth learning. Finally made one choice that mattered more than all the others combined. Colonel Robert Mitchell, father, warrior, teacher, flawed man who found grace at the end. Gone but not forgotten, not by the daughter who forgave him, not by the legacy he left behind, not by the lesson that would echo through generations. The third shot, the one that defines us. Not by what we kill, but by what we choose to protect. Not by our first choices, but by our last. Not by the years we waste, but by the moments we make count. Robert Mitchell made his last moment count, and that was enough. That was everything. That was grace. The funeral was small, military honors but no fanfare. A gray November morning at Arlington National Cemetery where thousands of white headstones stood in perfect rows like silent soldiers at eternal attention. Katherine stood at the graveside in her dress uniform, hands folded in front of her, watching as 7 Marines fired 3 volleys into the cold air. The crack of rifles echoed across the hills. The smell of gunpowder drifted on the wind. Taps played, each mournful note hanging in the air like a question that would never be answered. Colonel Robert Mitchell was laid to rest between a Vietnam veteran who died in 1971 and a Gulf War casualty from 1991. Good company. Warriors who had served and sacrificed and carried their own weights to their own graves. The headstone was simple. Name, rank, dates of service, no mention of Beirut or the Ghost or any of the classified operations that had defined his career. Just a man who served 40 years and died trying to make one thing right. Katherine accepted the folded flag from the funeral detail. The Marine who handed it to her was young, maybe 22, with eyes that had not yet seen combat. He spoke the words with crisp formality. On behalf of the President of the United States Marine Corps, and a grateful nation, please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your loved one's honorable and faithful service. Honorable and faithful service. The words felt both true and incomplete. Robert had served honorably for most of his career and dishonorably at the end when honor demanded disobedience. He had been faithful to the Corps until faithfulness meant betraying conscience. The contradictions were what made him human. The imperfections were what made his final choices meaningful. Doc stood beside Katherine in his dress uniform, Master Chief insignia gleaming on his sleeve. To her other side stood Susan Morrison with her sons. They had insisted on attending, on honoring the man who had avenged their husband and father even though it cost him everything. Their presence was grace made visible. Forgiveness embodied in flesh and blood, standing at a graveside on a cold morning. The ceremony ended. People dispersed slowly, speaking in hushed tones the way people do at military funerals. Katherine remained at the grave for a long time after everyone else left. Just her and the headstone and the flag in her arms and the child growing inside her that Robert would never meet. She had so much to tell him, so much that had happened in the 3 weeks since his death. But the words would not come. She just stood there in silence, trying to feel his presence and finding only absence, trying to hear his voice and finding only wind through barren trees, trying to believe he was watching and finding only the cold certainty of a body in the ground. "I took the deal," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Like you made me promise. Pleaded guilty to reduced charges, conduct unbecoming, failure to obey orders. They dropped the mutiny and desertion charges. Dishonorable discharge changed to general under honorable conditions. No prison time, but I'm out of the Navy and out of the teams. Done." She looked down at the flag in her arms. "I should be angrier about it, should feel cheated, but mostly I just feel tired and relieved and grateful that I get to raise this baby instead of doing it from a cell." The wind picked up, making her eyes water. Or maybe it was tears. Katherine could no longer tell the difference. Vance is still fighting. His lawyers are good, but the FBI has him on conspiracy, obstruction of justice, attempted murder. The contractors are testifying against him. Walsh flipped and is cooperating. Even some of his Senate colleagues are distancing themselves now that the evidence is public. She managed a bitter smile. You were right. He's surviving but not winning. His legacy is poisoned now. Everyone knows what he did. History will remember him as a traitor. She pressed her hand to her stomach, feeling the slight swell there. The baby's due in May, 5 months. I'm going to name him Robert Morrison Mitchell, just like I promised. And I'm going to tell him about you, about the lessons, about choosing right over easy, about the third shot that defines us. Katherine knelt and placed her hand on the cold granite of the headstone. Thank you for coming back, for teaching me, for showing me what matters. You were a terrible father for 28 years, but a great one at the end. And maybe that's the lesson too, that it's never too late, that redemption is real, that we can choose who we want to be no matter what we've been. She stood, wiped her eyes, straightened her uniform. I have to go. Court-martial is in 2 hours, but I'll come back. I'll bring your grandson when he's born. I'll teach him to shoot when he's old enough. I'll pass on everything you taught me. Her voice broke. I'll make sure you're not forgotten, I promise. Katherine walked away from the grave without looking back because looking back would break her, and she needed to stay whole for what came next. The legal battle was not over. The fight was just beginning, and she needed to face it with the strength her father had shown her, the courage he had finally found at the end. The court-martial proceedings took place in a stark courtroom at Naval Base Coronado. Katherine sat at the defense table in her service dress blues, the uniform she would never wear again after today. Her lawyer, a Navy JAG captain named Marcus Chen, who was no relation to her teammate, was competent and thorough, but they both knew the outcome was predetermined. The plea deal was the best they could hope for. The charges were read: conduct unbecoming an officer, failure to obey lawful orders, assault on a superior officer. The prosecution presented its case with clinical efficiency. Katherine had disobeyed direct orders, had modified mission parameters without authorization, had assaulted Lieutenant Walsh and prevented her from performing her duties, had taken shots at targets not designated in her rules of engagement. The facts were not in dispute. What was in dispute was whether those actions were justified. Captain Chen called his witnesses. Special Agent Daniel Pritchard of the FBI testified about the investigation into Senator Vance, about the evidence of corruption, about Marcus Webb being a protected witness and Special Agent Brennan being in danger, about the contractors hired to stage a false flag attack. The courtroom listened in silence as the full scope of the conspiracy was laid out. Dr. Harrison testified about Katherine's character, about her professionalism, about her dedication to protecting innocent lives, about the impossible position she had been placed in and the courage it took to choose conscience over career. Susan Morrison testified about her husband's death in Beirut, about learning the truth after 40 years, about understanding why Katherine had made the choices she made, about forgiveness and redemption and the cost of doing right in a world that often rewarded doing wrong. The prosecution tried to argue that none of it mattered, that military discipline required obedience even when orders seemed wrong, that allowing individuals to decide which orders to follow would destroy the chain of command and make military operations impossible, that Katherine's actions, however well-intentioned, could not be excused. The judge, a Navy captain with 30 years of service, and the weathered face of someone who had seen the moral complexity of war up close, listened to everything with careful attention. When both sides rested, he took a recess to consider the evidence. Katherine sat in the hallway outside the courtroom with Doc and Susan and her lawyer. None of them spoke. There was nothing left to say. They had presented the truth. Now they waited to see if truth mattered. The judge returned after 2 hours. The courtroom was called to order. Katherine stood at attention as the verdict was read. Captain Mitchell, this court finds you guilty of conduct unbecoming an officer and failure to obey lawful orders. However, this court also recognizes the extraordinary circumstances under which those failures occurred. You were placed in an impossible position by the criminal actions of others. You chose to protect innocent lives at great personal cost. While this court cannot condone disobedience to orders, this court also cannot ignore the moral courage you demonstrated. The judge paused, looking directly at Katherine. Your sentence is as follows. General discharge under honorable conditions. Loss of all military benefits and retirement pay. Forfeiture of rank and pay, but no confinement. No federal conviction on your record beyond this military court-martial. You are dismissed from service, but you leave with your freedom and your honor intact. Catherine felt something release in her chest, not joy, not relief, just the absence of the crushing weight she had been carrying since the mountain. She had lost her career, her identity, everything she had built over 12 years. But she had kept her conscience, her child, her future. And in the end, those mattered more. The judge continued, Captain Mitchell, before you are dismissed, this court wants you to know something. What you did took courage of a kind most officers never face. You were put in a position where following orders meant becoming an assassin, and disobeying orders meant destroying your career. You chose the harder path, the righteous path, the path your father taught you. His voice softened slightly. This court knew Colonel Mitchell, served with him in Desert Storm. He was a good man who made mistakes and spent his life trying to atone for them. At the end, he succeeded. He taught you well. You honor his memory by the choice you made. He struck his gavel. This court is adjourned. Catherine stood at attention as the judge left. Then she turned to Doc and Susan and her lawyer and allowed herself one moment of emotion. Tears fell freely as Doc pulled her into a fierce embrace. You did good, kid, Doc said roughly. Your old man would be proud. I know. Catherine's voice was muffled against his shoulder. I feel him, watching, approving, telling me it was worth it. Susan took Catherine's hands when Doc released her. You have a future now, a child to raise, a life to build. Don't waste it on regrets. Honor Robert by living well. Catherine nodded, wiping her eyes. I will, I promise. The courtroom emptied slowly. Catherine walked out into California sunshine that felt too bright after the dim formality of the proceedings. She was no longer Captain Mitchell, no longer a SEAL, no longer anything except a woman who had made an impossible choice and survived to face the consequences. But she was alive and free and carrying a child who would grow up knowing his grandfather's story. That was enough. That was everything. The news broke that evening. Senator Harold Vance indicted on 17 federal charges, including conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, wire fraud, and violations of the Arms Export Control Act. The FBI had built an airtight case using the contractor's testimony, Walsh's cooperation, and decades of financial records showing payments to offshore accounts and falsified procurement reports. Catherine watched the coverage from her small apartment in Coronado, the one she had rented after being released from custody. The news showed Vance being led from his Georgetown home in handcuffs, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. After 40 years of avoiding consequences, justice had finally caught up. The reporters asked questions. How did he think he would get away with it? Why did he believe he was above the law? Did he have any remorse for the Marines who died in Beirut or the people he tried to kill in California? Vance said nothing. Just walked to the FBI vehicle with his expensive suit and his silver hair and his face that showed no remorse, no understanding, no acceptance that he had done anything wrong. He would fight the charges, hire the best lawyers, try to use his connections and his leverage and his decades of accumulated dirt to wriggle free. But Catherine knew he would lose. The evidence was too strong, the witnesses too credible, the public outrage too intense. Vance would spend his remaining years in federal prison, his reputation destroyed, his legacy reduced to a cautionary tale about corruption and abuse of power. Robert had been right. Vance was surviving but not winning, and eventually even survival ran out. Catherine turned off the television and sat in the quiet of her apartment. Her dress uniform hung in the closet, soon to be packed away forever. Her SEAL trident sat on the dresser, a symbol of what she had been and would never be again. The Beirut rifle she had used on the mission was locked in an evidence locker somewhere, probably destined for a museum eventually, as the weapon that had exposed one of the biggest military corruption scandals in modern history. She was 28 weeks pregnant now. The baby moved frequently, little kicks and rolls that reminded her she was no longer alone. Never alone. Carrying the next generation. Carrying the legacy. Carrying forward everything Robert had taught her about choosing conscience over comfort. Her phone rang. Doc's number. She answered. You see the news? Doc's voice carried satisfaction. Yeah, they got him. Damn right they got him. And the best part? Morrison's widow filed a civil suit. wrongful death. She's suing Vance's estate for everything he has. Even if he beats the criminal charges, which he won't, she's going to take every penny he ever made. Catherine smiled despite herself. Good. David Morrison deserves that. His family deserves that. They do. Doc paused. How are you holding up? Losing the uniform today had to be hard. It was. It is. Catherine looked at the trident on her dresser. But I'm okay. Better than okay. I have a future now, a purpose that doesn't depend on a uniform or a rank or a mission. What are you going to do after the baby comes? Catherine had been thinking about that for weeks. She had training and skills, but no formal civilian credentials. She had a reputation, but it was complicated, associated with both heroism and insubordination. She had experience teaching, but no institution that would hire a dishonorably discharged officer. I don't know yet, she admitted, but I'll figure it out. I always do. Well, when you do figure it out, let me know if you need help. I'm retiring next month. 35 years is enough. Time to be a civilian and sleep past 0500. They talked for a few more minutes about nothing important. Just the comfortable conversation of two people who had been through war together and survived. When they hung up, Catherine felt less alone. The months passed with the strange slowness and speed of waiting. Winter gave way to spring. Catherine grew larger, slower, more uncomfortable. She attended doctor's appointments and prepared a nursery and tried to envision a future that did not include the military structure that had defined her adult life. She visited Robert's grave every week, brought flowers, talked to him about the pregnancy, the court case against Vance, the slowly building plans for what came next. Sometimes she brought the leather notebook he had given her, the one filled with 40 years of sniper wisdom and philosophy. She read entries to him, learning his mind through his words, understanding the man he had been before, the weight broke him, and the man he became when he finally learned to put it down. One entry, written just days before he died, stayed with her. The third shot is not about killing. It's about living. Living with purpose. Living with courage. Living with the knowledge that your choices define you more than your circumstances. Catherine will make her third shot soon. The choice that will define who she becomes. I won't be there to see it, but I know she'll choose right. She always does. That's her mother in her. That's the best of what I could have been if I'd been brave enough. I'm proud of her. So proud. And I'm grateful I lived long enough to tell her that. Catherine cried the first time she read it. Cried the 10th time. Still cried the 20th time. The words were a gift. Proof that at the end, Robert had seen her clearly. Had understood her. Had loved her in the way fathers love daughters when they finally stopped being afraid of that love. On a warm evening in early May, Catherine went into labor. Doc drove her to the Naval Medical Center, where she had visiting privileges despite her discharge. The labor was long and difficult, made worse by the baby being posterior and her blood pressure spiking dangerously high. For hours, she labored in pain while doctors monitored and nurses encouraged, and Doc sat in the waiting room like an anxious grandfather. At 2:37 in the morning on May 15th, Robert Morrison Mitchell was born. 7 pounds, 3 ounces, 20 inches long, perfect fingers and perfect toes, and his grandfather's stubborn chin visible even on a newborn face. Catherine held him against her chest, skin to skin, feeling his tiny heart beat against hers. She examined every detail. The dark hair, the slate blue eyes that would probably change to brown like hers and Robert's, the way his little hand curled around her finger with surprising strength. The miracle of new life emerging from so much death. Your grandfather would have loved you, she whispered. He never got to meet you, but he died knowing you were coming. And he died happy because of it, because you represent hope, the future. Everything he wanted to leave behind that was good. The baby made small noises, already finding his voice. Catherine smiled through exhausted tears. I'm going to tell you about him, about the mistakes he made and the lessons he learned and the courage he found at the end. I'm going to teach you what he taught me. And when you're old enough, I'm going to teach you to shoot. She pressed a kiss to his forehead. Not because I want you to be a soldier, but because the rifle is a metaphor for discipline, for precision, for understanding that actions have consequences and skill without wisdom is just noise. Your grandfather understood that at the end, and I'm going to make sure you understand it from the beginning. Doc was allowed in after Catherine had rested and the baby had been checked and declared healthy. The grizzled Master Chief looked down at the infant with something like wonder. He looks like Robert, Same jawline, same stubborn expression, even when he's sleeping. Doc touched the baby's tiny hand with one weathered finger. Your old man would have been insufferable. Grandfather bragging rights and all that. Catherine smiled. He earned the right, finally. Doc pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed. What are you going to do now? You've got a baby, no job, no military benefits, and no clear path forward. I've been thinking about that. Catherine adjusted the baby in her arms. There's no institution that will hire me, no military unit that will take me, no law enforcement agency that wants a court-martialed ex-SEAL. But that doesn't mean I can't teach. She looked at Doc. What if I started a program, private, independent, training women who want to learn precision shooting and tactical skills, not for military service, but for self-defense, for competition, for confidence, a place where the lessons matter more than the credentials. Doc considered this. It would be hard, building a business from nothing, getting clients when your reputation is complicated, dealing with the stigma of your discharge. Everything worth doing is hard. Catherine's voice was firm. Robert taught me that. He also taught me that when institutions fail you, you build your own. When the system won't let you do what's right, you do it anyway and accept the consequences. She shifted the sleeping baby. I have his notebook. 40 years of knowledge about shooting and teaching and the philosophy behind it all. I have my own skills and experience. I have a story that resonates with people who value conscience over career. And I have a son who will grow up seeing his mother build something meaningful from the ashes of what was lost. Doc smiled slowly. Robert would approve. Building a legacy, passing on wisdom, teaching the next generation. That's exactly what he wanted for you. I know. Catherine looked down at her son. That's why I'm doing it. Not just for me, for him. For every young shooter who needs to learn that the rifle is a tool and a responsibility and a metaphor all at once. For everyone who needs to know that skill without wisdom is dangerous, and wisdom without courage is useless. Over the next months, Catherine built what would become known as the Mitchell Precision Training Academy. She started small, teaching basic marksmanship to women at a rented range in rural California. Word spread slowly at first, then faster as students discovered that she was not just teaching mechanics, but philosophy. Not just how to shoot, but how to think, how to carry responsibility, how to choose right when the world made choosing hard. Her reputation, complicated as it was, became an asset. People wanted to learn from someone who had chosen conscience over career, who had walked away from the military rather than compromise her values, who had been court-martialed for doing what was right and wore that court-martial like a badge of honor. The program grew. Catherine hired instructors, all veterans with their own stories of choosing honor over ease. Doc came out of retirement to teach tactics and leadership. Susan Morrison's son, David, became a regular guest instructor, teaching about military history and the cost of following orders blindly. Catherine divided her time between teaching and raising Robert, who everyone called Bobby. He was a curious, stubborn child who asked endless questions and wanted to touch everything. Catherine brought him to the range from the time he could walk, always with hearing protection, always supervised. He grew up around rifles and discipline and stories about his grandfather. On Bobby's 8th birthday, Catherine took him to Arlington. They stood at Robert's grave and Catherine told him the full story about Beirut and Morrison and Vance and the choice Robert had made at the end, about courage and conscience and the third shot that defines us. Your grandfather was a complicated man, Catherine said. He made mistakes, big ones. He hurt people he loved and spent years running from what he'd done. But at the end, when it mattered most, he chose right. He chose to stand up, to fight back, to teach me what mattered. Bobby looked up at his mother with his grandfather's eyes and a young face. Is that why you teach? To pass on what he taught you? Yes. Catherine knelt beside her bow. That's exactly why. Because wisdom matters. Because lessons learned through pain shouldn't be wasted. Because the best way to honor someone is to carry forward what they gave you and make it matter in the world. Bobby was quiet for a moment, processing. Then he asked the question Catherine had been waiting for. When will you teach me to shoot? Catherine smiled. Today, if you're ready. They drove to her private range, the one she had built with the settlement money from a grateful FBI and the proceeds from teaching. Bobby sat in the passenger seat, serious and excited in equal measure. Catherine felt Robert's presence as she drove, as if he were sitting in the back seat watching this moment unfold. At the range, Katherine retrieved an old Remington 700 from its case, Robert's rifle, the one he had carried for 40 years, the one he had cleaned that cold Montana morning when Doc's call had changed everything. She had kept it maintained, ready for this moment. "This was your grandfather's rifle," Katherine said. "He wanted you to learn with it, to understand that the rifle is not just a tool, it's a responsibility, a metaphor, a way of thinking about life." She showed Bobby how to hold it, how to check that it was unloaded, how to respect the weight and the potential, how to understand that power required wisdom or it became destruction. "Your grandfather used to say that every sniper takes 3 shots in their life, not 3 bullets, 3 moments that define who they are." Katherine's voice carried the weight of lessons learned and relearned. The first shot kills your innocence. It's when you realize that actions have real consequences and choices matter. Bobby listened with intense focus. "What's the second shot?" "The second shot is the one that haunts you. The moment when everything goes wrong despite your best efforts. When you learn that being skilled and being right aren't always enough. When you carry weight that never gets lighter." Katherine's eyes were distant. "Your grandfather carried his second shot for 40 years. It nearly destroyed him." "And the third shot?" Bobby's voice was quiet. Katherine knelt beside her son and looked him in the eye. "The third shot is the one that defines you. It's not about killing. It's about choosing. Choosing who you want to be when the choice is hard. Choosing conscience over comfort. Choosing to do right even when the cost is everything." She touched his face gently. "Your grandfather made his third shot on a mountain in California. He chose to save innocent lives even though it meant he would die sooner and harder. He chose to teach me even though I had hated him for 28 years. He chose to be a father when he had been a coward. That third shot is what I remember. That's who he was at the end. That's who I want you to become." Bobby absorbed this with the seriousness of children who understand they're being trusted with something important. "What was your third shot, Mom?" Katherine smiled. "You, choosing to have you even when it meant losing everything else. Choosing to be a mother and a teacher instead of a soldier. Choosing to build something new instead of mourning what was lost. You're my third shot, Bobby, and you'll have yours someday. When that moment comes, I want you to choose well." She stood and helped him position the rifle. "But for now, we learn the fundamentals. How to breathe, how to be patient, how to understand that rushed shots miss and careful shots connect. Your grandfather spent 60 years learning this. I spent 20. You're starting younger, and you'll go farther." They spent the afternoon at the range, Katherine teaching with infinite patience, Bobby learning with his grandfather's determination. The rifle was too heavy for him to hold unsupported, but Katherine helped him brace it properly. The recoil was too strong for him to manage alone, but Katherine showed him how to lean into it and let it happen. The concepts were too advanced for complete understanding, but Katherine planted seeds that would grow with time. At the end of the day, Bobby hit a target at 100 yards with Katherine's help. The bullet struck center mass, not because of his skill, but because of her guidance. But someday his skill would match her guidance and exceed it. Someday he would shoot alone. And someday, years from now, he would teach his own children the same lessons in the same way with the same rifle. That was legacy. That was immortality. That was what it meant to pass forward something worth having. That evening, back at her home, Katherine sat on the porch watching Bobby play in the yard. The sun was setting over the California hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. She held Robert's leather notebook in her lap, reading entries she had memorized but returned to often because some wisdom bore repeating. Doc pulled up in his truck and joined her on the porch, moving slower than he used to, but still carrying himself with the dignity of someone who had served well and earned his rest. He looked out at Bobby with satisfaction. "You're doing good work," Doc said. "The academy, the teaching, Bobby, Robert would be proud." "I hope so." Katherine closed the notebook. "Some days I feel him, like he's watching, approving. Other days I just feel the absence." "He's watching," Doc said with certainty. "And so is Morrison and all the others we've lost. They're all watching and they're all proud because you took what they died protecting and made it mean something." Katherine was quiet for a moment. "Do you think I made the right choice? Going rogue, losing the uniform, building this instead?" "Yes." Doc's voice was firm. "Because the alternative was becoming someone you couldn't live with, following orders that would have destroyed your soul, being the weapon Vance wanted instead of the woman Robert taught you to be. He pointed at Bobby, and that kid out there, he's growing up with a mother who chose conscience, who demonstrated courage, who showed him that institutions can be wrong and individuals can be right. That's a gift worth more than any military career. Catherine smiled. You always know what to say. I'm old, that's my job. Doc stretched his legs. I've got news. Morrison's lawsuit settled. Vance's estate paid out $15 million. Susan wants to donate $5 million to your academy. Establish a scholarship fund for women who can't afford the training. Call it the David Morrison Memorial Fund. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. That's too much. I can't accept that. You can and you will. Doc's voice was gentle. Because it's not about you. It's about making David's death count for something 40 years later. It's about turning tragedy into hope. It's about legacy. He stood to leave, pausing at the porch steps. Life is long if you're lucky, Catherine. Your father got 62 years and made the last few weeks count more than all the rest combined. You've got 50 more years, maybe 60. Make them count. Teach, build, pass on the wisdom. That's how we beat death, by making sure what we learn doesn't die with us. After Doc left, Catherine sat alone on the porch as darkness fell and stars emerged. Bobby came inside when she called, tired and happy, and full of questions about guns and shooting, and when they could go to the range again. She fed him dinner and read him stories and tucked him into bed with the same rituals mothers have performed for generations. In his room above his bed hung a photograph of Robert in his dress blues. Bobby said goodnight to his grandfather every evening, a habit Catherine had encouraged. Some nights, Bobby asked questions about the man in the photo. Tonight, he just said goodnight and closed his eyes. Catherine stood in the doorway watching her son sleep, seeing Robert's jawline in the child's face, seeing her mother's kindness in the way he smiled, seeing the future in every breath he took. She walked to her own bedroom and retrieved the trident from her drawer, the symbol of what she had been. She held it for a long moment, feeling the weight of memory and identity and choices made. Then she placed it in a box along with her uniform and medals and closed the lid. Not thrown away, not forgotten, but put aside for what came next, because she was not Captain Mitchell anymore. She was not a SEAL or an operator or a warrior in the institutional sense. She was Catherine, mother, teacher, keeper of lessons learned in blood and transmitted in hope, builder of futures and teller of stories, and guardian of wisdom too important to lose. That night, Catherine dreamed of Robert, not as he was at the end, dying in gray and eaten by cancer, but as he must have been at 23 in Beirut before the weight crushed him, young and strong and full of the certainty that came before experience taught humility. He stood on a rooftop with Morrison beside him, both of them smiling at some joke, both of them alive in that moment before everything went wrong. In the dream, Robert turned to look at Catherine. His expression shifted from surprise to recognition to joy. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came. Just a smile, a nod, a sense of approval and peace and completion. Then the dream faded and Catherine woke to morning light and her son calling for breakfast and the beautiful ordinary demands of a life lived forward. 10 years passed. The academy grew. Catherine's reputation evolved from controversial to respected. She trained hundreds of women in precision shooting and tactical thinking. She taught them about responsibility and wisdom, and the third shot that defines character. She built a community of students who became instructors, who became advocates for conscious competence in a world that often valued compliance over conscience. Bobby grew into a thoughtful teenager who shot with his grandfather's precision and his mother's patience. He had no interest in military service, but deep interest in teaching and philosophy. Catherine suspected he would become an instructor himself someday, carrying forward the lessons into another generation. On the anniversary of Robert's death, Catherine returned to Arlington with Bobby. He was 18 now, graduating high school, preparing for college. They stood at the grave together, two generations connected by blood and lessons and choices made before Bobby was born. I've been thinking about the third shot, Bobby said, about what defines us, and I think I understand it now. Catherine waited, curious what her son had concluded after years of thinking about his grandfather's philosophy. It's not about the shot itself, Bobby continued. It's about whether you're shooting because you choose to or because someone else told you to. Whether you're protecting something worth protecting or just following orders. Whether the bullet serves life or death, creation or destruction, love or fear. He looked at his mother. Grandpa chose, you chose, and someday I'll have to choose. And when that moment comes, I want to choose like you did, like he did, conscience over comfort, right over easy, love over fear. Catherine pulled her son close. That's exactly what he wanted, what I want, what everyone who has carried the weight wants for those who come after, not perfection, just consciousness, choice, the courage to stand up when standing up costs everything. They stood together at the grave as the sun set and shadows lengthened across the endless rows of markers. 3 generations, father and daughter and grandson, connected by blood and bullets and lessons learned the hard way, connected by choices that rippled forward through time, creating consequences that outlived the people who made them. Robert Mitchell was dead, but Robert Mitchell lived in the academy his daughter built, in the students she taught, in the grandson who carried his name and his jawline and his philosophy forward into a future he would never see, in the leather notebook filled with wisdom earned through pain, in the story told and retold about courage found at the end of a wasted life. That was legacy. That was redemption. That was grace. Not perfection, not absolution, just the knowledge that one good choice at the end could outweigh decades of bad ones. That teaching mattered more than doing. That wisdom passed forward was immortality of the only kind that lasted. The last light faded from the sky. Catherine and Bobby walked away from the grave, talking quietly about memories and lessons and the future Bobby would build with the tools he'd been given. Behind them, on a simple headstone in a sea of simple headstones, a name and dates marked the passage of one flawed man through one complicated life. But the name and dates were not the story. The story was in the living. In Catherine's academy training its 1,000th student. In Bobby preparing to carry forward what he'd been taught. In Susan Morrison's scholarship fund giving opportunities to women who otherwise would have none. In Doc's retirement spent teaching young instructors the difference between skill and wisdom. In the FBI agent whose life Catherine saved testifying before Congress about corruption. In the reforms implemented because one woman chose conscience. In the ripples spreading outward from one choice on one mountain on one November day. The story was in the third shot, the one that defines us. The one Robert Mitchell made when he taught his daughter that disobedience to authority could be the highest form of loyalty to principle. The one Catherine made when she chose to protect innocent lives over protecting her career. The ones Bobby and his generation would make when their moments came and they had to choose who they wanted to be. The story was in the legacy, and the legacy lived, not in stone and medals and official honors, but in hearts and minds and choices made by people who learned from those who came before that courage was possible, that redemption was real, that it was never too late to choose right, that one good shot could define a life and echo through generations. Robert Mitchell had made his shot, Catherine had made hers, Bobby would make his, and the circle would continue, unbroken, carrying forward the hard-won wisdom that the rifle was sacred and the choice was holy, and the third shot was everything. In the end, that was enough. That was more than enough. That was grace made visible in the living of days and the teaching of lessons, and the slow, patient work of building legacies that outlasted flesh. Colonel Robert Mitchell, Katherine Morrison Mitchell, Robert Morrison Mitchell. 3 names, 3 generations, one lesson passed forward like a torch in darkness. Choose conscience. Stand up. Make the third shot count. That's how we live. That's how we matter. That's how we win. The rifle is sacred, the choice is holy, the legacy lives. And that is enough. This story hit me harder than I expected while researching it. Colonel Mitchell's choice between duty and conscience reminds me of conversations I've had with veterans who carried weight no one else could see. For those who served, did you ever face a moment where following orders felt wrong? How did you handle it? For everyone, what would you do if saving innocent lives meant losing everything you'd built? Drop your thoughts below. I read every comment, and your stories often inspire the next one I tell. And if this resonated with you, there are more like it coming. Hit subscribe so you don't miss them. What military story should I cover next?